time to rev up the engine. It's the Eurosport Super Racing Weekend.
Hello, welcome to Eurosport's second Super Racing Weekend. We're at the Czech circuit of Brno, this 5.4-kilometre track in the middle of the heartland of the Czech Republic, just outside of Brno, the second city of the Czech Republic, an inhabitants of about 500,000. And this track dates back to 1930s, when it was a motorcycle Grand Prix track racing on the roads, and the recent track rebuilt in 1987 as a full race circuit, and no more houses for these guys. Now the racing looks like this. We will pick up the start of the FIA GT race, show you the highlights of the Euro Super Touring and Super Productions before we come back for the end of the GTs.
The FIA GT Championship in Eurosport's Super Racing Weekend. With Lease Plan, fleet management in motion. Filatigel, stretching fibers, fabrics and yarns.
Cars on the grid ready for the second round of the FIA GT Championship at Brno, the second race in the Eurosport Super Racing Weekends. And the fastest 12 cars, 6 from NGT, 6 from the GT category, who competed in Saturday's Super Pole, will be the first 12 on the grid. This is how the championship looks. The list of drivers: Campbell, Walter and Coronel winning at Monza. From Bouchou and Belloc, the Labra competition pair. And the best of the Ferraris behind the Lister and 3 Vipers in 5th position. Blielinger and Duez, Sabatini and Spinelli in 6th position. And as regarding the teams, well, the Lister Storm team with 10 points for winning, leading from Belmondo Racing. Labra competition in 3rd spot ahead of Raffanelli and Rodolfi Orlando. Well, those are the GT lineups. The NGT class was run by Johnny Cicotto and Philip Pater. Now, the Venezuelan is being partnered this weekend by ex-Formula 3000 ace Andrea Chiesa, because Philip Pater has a clashing engagement. And they won in the NGT category. As a result, their team leading the NGT category for teams from the RWS Motorsport crew. Now, sitting on the pole and ready to go, the man Anthony Compen.
Well, we worked the whole weekend on a race setup, so we didn't have a particular wet setup for the qualifying. So I think we can keep the pace, but now it's wet, so I only did some laps this morning in the wet. Still, we were the fastest, so I think, yeah, we will be okay. I hope we can keep the pace and hope to make a good race, yeah.
Who do you think your main competitors will be in the race?
Well, for sure, Bouchou is very good, but I don't know, this morning on the wet he wasn't so impressive. And then you have the Listers, for sure they will come, but I don't know, it will be difficult for them to pass all the Porsches. They're quite behind, so I tried to make a gap in the beginning, but it's a long race, everything can happen, so we will see.
3-hour race in prospect, and awful conditions likewise. The skies leaden, and snow and rain have swept through the Czech Republic on Friday, Saturday and on Sunday, so why should Monday be any different? Indeed, the weather forecasters are suggesting it won't. Emmanuel Clerico was the man who got pole in Super Pole. Kumpen starts that car. Bouchou and Belloc start second. Vos and Richebourg third, and the fastest of the NGT cars, qualified by the Czech Thomas Enger, fresh from third in the San Marino round of the Formula 3000 Championship, is fourth for a long time on top of Super Pole. And David Leslie alongside me. David, a lot of the reason for that was simply the conditions.
Yes, it changed very dramatically yesterday. When it went out the start, these NGT cars had the best of the circuit. They were quite dry out there, and as the practice went along, it just got wetter and wetter. And as we see today, it's the same. We're starting in these wet, drizzly conditions. It looks as though it's not too bad. It could dry out depending on what the clouds are doing up above us. but we'll have to just wait and see exactly what happens.
Well, we saw through the course of Sunday, the practice day, that it would get wet and dry, snow, rain, all sorts, and that's going to make this race a real lottery, which may play into the hands of some of the less fancied runners if the faster cars perhaps miscue coming in for a pit stop and taking on a change of tyres to suit conditions, which may then immediately change on them. We'll have to wait and see. Starting lineup then with the Belmondo Viper on pole, Clerico doing the qualifying, Kumpen starting, and the Bouchou will be starting the Labre competition car beside it. Vincent Vos starts in his car, Thomas Enger alongside in 4th place. And then the second of the Belmondo cars, and the RWS Motorsport second in the NGT class. Then the Labre Porsche, Patrice Gousselard, Sebastian Dumez. Dumez dropped it in the gravel. That wasn't him that went off in Superpole, was it? Ahead of the Lister. Then the Jambi Racing Ferrari, ahead of the second Lister, which Julian Bailey will start. Then the second of the Labre Porsches, Bruno Eichmann and Jürgen von Gartzen, heading up the next row of the grid. Hazemans and Jeroen Bleekemolen sharing the faster of the Carsport Holland cars, ahead of the better of the pair of Raffinelli Ferraris, which line up in 7th and 8th rows of the grid. And looking further down then, still plenty of Viper interest behind the NGT cars, as you can see, as well as the Ferraris and the Listers. So those NGT cars on the first and second and third rows of the grid are certainly going to have their work cut out for them. 69 is one of our camera cars. Johnny Cicotto and Chiesa. Steve O'Rourke and Tim Sugden start right behind them in the MK car. And from then on down, it's the NGT Porsches, and we will see at the bottom of the grid the father and son combination, Franz and Nico Vieth in their Ferrari, finally getting the car running, but not running that quickly. Neither is the second Carsport Viper of the father and son Bleekemolen combination. Well, we'll be back in just a moment with the start of the FIA race. Join us for that in a second. Welcome back to Eurosport's Super Racing Weekend action from Brno in the Czech Republic, starting with the beginning of the FIA GT race, and the poleman, Anthony Kumpen, flying away from the rolling start as his Viper sends up the first of many rooster tails of spray. Not raining heavily, but snowflakes on the windscreens on the warm-up lap tell you just how cold conditions are. They had real trouble getting heat into the tyres in the Superpole and in qualifying, even when it was dry, and the air temperature 4 degrees, track temperature 2 degrees according to the start line gantry. And the Belmondo Vipers first and second, that's Kumpen in 11 and Vincent Vos in the number 12 car. Right behind them, the Bouchou Labre competition car, the white, red and black striped car there, and Christophe Bouchou fishtailing around. David, cold tyres, no tyre warmers, a rolling start at very low pace behind the pace car, and that means that they're going to be in real trouble with grip in these early moments.
As I was trying to say, the drivers are having great difficulty getting their tyres warm. They're going out there and it's just so cold that they're spending 3 to 4 laps before they get any heat into their tyres whatsoever. So it's taking quite a long time. So you see the car slipping slightly around on this first lap. They really are taking it very easy just to try and get around these few laps before they get some sort of heat into it and settle down into this 3-hour-long race.
Well, of course, settling down is the most important part. Qualifying and Superpole, all very well, but what really matters is the race, and survival, I think, is going to be high on everybody's agenda in these opening laps. I don't expect too many heroics, and certainly Bouchou being very tentative indeed. Well, the sound we're getting, as you see, doesn't quite tally with Christophe Bouchou's actions, and somebody coming down the inside. That's the Carsport Holland car, takes a pass on Bouchou. Well, he was way away from the apex of the corner there. Christophe, it can't be surely, David, do you think that he started on slicks? He's going quickly, but not as quickly as anybody else. He's just been passed, I think, by the Lister as well.
No, I think he's out there just taking it nice and easy. He's realised that they went extremely well at Monza there, so he wants to make sure he finishes this race and gets himself a lot more points, and the last thing he wants to do is take any risks whatsoever.
The Car Sport Holland car going very quickly indeed. It's gone past Marc Duez in the red Ferrari and is now up to third place. Bouchou's also been passed by the Lister, and at the moment the NGT cars are queuing up to get past the Viper. So Bouchou being, well, circumspect in a way that I really have not seen him ever be quite so circumspect. He's being slow rather than steady. However, it is a 3-hour race, and that's the most important part, is what happens in the final 3 minutes, not the first 3 minutes. Now, the Car Sport Holland Vipers, Mike Hazeman's starting that one, and he was on 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13th on the grid, currently shown in third place. So that's a reasonable start, I think you'd have to say, by Hazeman's, to pick up those many places in appalling conditions, not even in long straights like Monza, but on what is basically a fairly medium and slow speed track. That's great opening driving.
I think it is. What he seems to have here is a car that's set up very different to the other Vipers around him, and he's certainly ploughing his way through this field in leaps and bounds through all these other cars. You can see the cars moving around. Thomas Enger there with a Coca-Cola car number 65, and that's a GT car, NGT car, up there mixing it with the best of the GT cars. So these cars are all slipping, sliding around, and having all that 700 plus horsepower under your right foot maybe isn't a lot of use to you in these particular weather conditions.
Ignore the noises you're hearing. These noises are from the Lister of Jamie Campbell-Walter, which was a couple of corners ahead of the Labra car, as you can hear being passed here by the 77 car. The engine noise is definitely not bearing much relation to what's going on in the pictures, but the Labra competition car being dropped down the order, and he will be out of the top 10 within a couple more moments. Of course, Thomas Enger there in the Coca-Cola car has the big advantage of being a native of the Czech Republic, and so he knows this track very well. He's done a lot of racing here, and I'm sure he will have done a lot in the rain as well. So not only is he not having to learn the circuit, but he's not having to learn the vagaries of the weather here either. And the other advantage that he's got in the NGT car over the Vipers is, of course, that he's not trying to put so much horsepower down through the rear wheels, and that just helps. The more horsepower you get, the more wheel spin you've got. Now, around the outside for second, another good move by the Car Sport Holland driver. In fact, is that for the lead? Yeah, David's holding up one finger. It is for the lead. That is the leader then, from 13th on the grid in 3 laps. Now, that is pretty impressive by anybody's stretch of the imagination. That's how they were as they crossed the line. Kumpana has been passed by Hasemans. Voss still third, and in 4th place is Jamie Campbell-Walter. He too is closing on these Dunlop-shod Paul Belmondo Racing Vipers that were first and second. Now, interesting that the Car Sport Holland guys had problems at Monza because they have done so many modifications to their car. One of them was moving the oil tank for the dry sump engine right to the back of the car. And basically, the travel on the pipes was just too long. The pumps couldn't cope, and they ran their engines dry, destroyed £75,000 worth of engines in, well, not even 75 minutes worth of running. 3 engines gone over the weekend. But among the other things they've done is obviously, David, some fairly strong aero work, because that car is working very strongly indeed, as we see one of the Ferraris coming into the pits. And that, I think, will be the second of the Raffinelli cars.
Yes, the Hazelman car has done a lot of work to that car to try and make it better. They've certainly done all sorts of modifications. So it's working extremely well for them. They're gone from 13th on the grid all the way up to the lead, and they're making very best use. We can see the yellow flags there. There's somebody off on the right-hand side getting towed away.
Yeah, one of the NGT Porsches has gone off there. So just proving how tricky it still is. Now, a number of the Porsches further back down the field are driven by what you would definitely refer to as gentleman drivers. Gentlemen in their track manners, hopefully, as well as in their nature of largely paying for their own driving. Most of the front runners, though, David, professional drivers, and some of them with some fairly illustrious backgrounds. Some ex-Formula 1 drivers in the GT field, as well as in the Super Touring and Super Production. Some of these guys have got a lot of sports car racing under their belt, among which, just moving up into 3rd place at the back of the shot, Jamie Campbell-Walter. He shared last year the #1 Lister Storm with Julian Bailey, and Bailey is driving the #2 car. Bailey starting right at the back of the field, incidentally, because he wasn't on the rolling grid, and that was Problem for the Lister team, getting caught as the pit lane closed. Julian Bailey was still in the pits, but he is running, unlike Monza where he took the rolling start and then peeled in at the end of the first lap with a chronic misfire. The problems in Monza, Lister have traced down to muck in the fuel, which was blocking the injectors of Jamie Campbell-Walter's car in qualifying, and Julian Bailey's for the race. No reoccurrence of those. No reoccurrence of the oil tank problems either for the Haseman's Viper. And well, we saw this car go right to Magny-Cours, the final race of last year's championship, with a chance of defeating the Lister, and it looks as though this may be another season-long battle between the lead Carsport Holland machine and the Lister Storms. Different format to the two cars, of course. They're both front-engined, 8-litre V10 in the Viper and the V12 Jaguar engine in the front of the Lister Storm. And, well, Jamie had got past on the straight, but perhaps just getting his nose in front, he decided that discretion was the better part of valour in that battle for third place going into the first corner. The Belmondo team preparing the pit boards. On board now with Jamie Campbell-Walter. And that's a mixture of rain and snow, isn't it, David? There's some very, very fat raindrops they have in the Czech Republic otherwise.
Yes, it is. You can see it's coming down quite hard at the moment onto the screen. These cars quite often have only got one wiper, and the wiper's in front of the driver, and the camera we're looking through is in the passenger seat, or where the passenger seat would be. So therefore the screen is not getting white for us, but we can see it's coming down quite heavy now. Certainly a lot wetter now than it was when the race started. So the conditions look as though they're going to get worse rather than better as the race progresses.
I don't think that there would have been any gambling on slicks at the start of the race. The track was pretty wet, and what's more, the skies looked like it was likely to remain that way. The car of Thomas Enger, 65, now once more under pressure from Christophe Bouchou. I really can't believe it's taken Bouchou that long to come in. Maybe he has had his car set up for drying conditions and is just floundering in what are fairly wet conditions. We'll have to wait and see how he progresses. Jamie again not really pushing the issue too much about this third position. He can see quite clearly, as we can, that he and Vincent Vos are both reeling in the number 11 car, the front car in this picture. That's Anthony Kumpen, who is in second place. So Jamie, if he bides his time, might be in a position in 2 laps' time or so, as he comes onto the main straight, to pick up both second and third places in one fell swoop. As it is, they're catching the second place man, but that little group not catching this car. Mike Haseman's driving away from them.
This car certainly had a lot of, I tried to say before, had a lot of work done to it. Whatever it is they've done, it's certainly working extremely well, because now after only 4 laps they're some 8 seconds ahead of Kumpen and Vos, with Jamie Campbell-Walter and the winning car from last time out at Monza back in 4th position. We know at the start of the race last time Jamie started well back, and it didn't take him very long to get back right to the very front, but this time in these weather conditions it's taking him that little bit longer, and certainly the Haselman car at the front is stretching its lead lap by lap by quite a bit.
Well, Jamie was saying on Sunday rather, during qualifying, that the problem in the wet conditions, the colder it gets, the wetter it gets for the Lister, is heat in the tyres. He said the Vipers, being generally a softer sprung car, tend to roll a little more on their tyres. That's very bad news when it's really hot, because it tends to burn them up. But in cold conditions, it just helps keep the average temperature a little higher than the Lister's, which is the Lister is a much more stiffly sprung race car, much more developed perhaps even than the Viper. The Viper now familiar sight for the better part of a decade on the racetrack, since they first brought the car out as a GT1 machine, and then put it back into the GT2 class, where instead of getting trounced regularly, it became the benchmark. And the Lister Storm really the only constant rival to that car over the last 5 or 6 years. We've seen things like Coroyzer's Marcus Ellen 600, but because he's moved the gearbox from its normal position attached to the front-mounted engine, so being a transaxle effectively with the gearbox attached to the axle at the rear, that's not eligible for the FIA races, for the Le Mans series, or for the Le Mans 24 Hours itself. Now, we had an email in from Jeff Graham, wanted to know the story behind Julian Bailey and the Lister team, because Julian Bailey was originally not down to drive for the Lister team, and it was only pretty much at the 11th hour that he was called in to partner the number 2 car with Nicholas Springer. I have to say, Graham, I'm afraid we're not going to go there. Nobody is spilling the beans on the full story. I know that Julian was disappointed as the champion not to be asked back by Lawrence Pierce until the closing moments of the pre-season were over. But I'm sure that Lawrence is glad to have somebody, not only of Julian's ability, but of his experience with the Lister Storm, that he could call on to drive the car. And I believe that Julian will be alongside Nicholas Springer all season, as the number 1 combination of Campbell Walter and Tom Coronel should be fairly much a constant. Coronel does have a previous commitment to Dutch touring cars, which has taken him away from us this weekend. But Richard Dean, who will share the car with Jamie Campbell-Walter, is a long-time backup driver of Lister and has raced for Lister in the British and the FIA Championships. Well, the onboard and particularly the noises there that you could pick up coming from Thomas Enger's Porsche, David, showing that the NGT cars aren't having it all their own way in terms of grip either. That was he was being a bit gentle with the throttle, or not gentle, but certainly tentative with the throttle.
Yeah, these cars, rear engine, rear wheel drive, a lot of weight at the back of these cars, and they do tend to slide around a bit. We've seen it earlier, one of the pictures with Thomas Enger going around the corner, the amount of oversteer drifting that they have with the rear of these cars. And we can see the top 3 cars here, all out, nose to tail. So this is a really good battle for the NGT class lead.
The Art Engineering car in 2nd place, really giving Enner something to think about, and the RWS car, the 77 car, in 3rd spot as well. That's been started by Luca Riccatelli, and in the first of the Art Engineering cars is Fabio Babini. Now, he was in the Superpole runoffs at Monza as well. And is that sunshine? I'm not sure I recognise the track under those conditions. The sun is starting to break through, and it does look as though the rain and the snow have pretty much abated. Now, I wonder whether we will see a start of a charge from Christophe Bouchou if the track conditions start to come back. I really do feel that perhaps the Chirot car has been set up, the Chirot Viper has been set up for drying conditions, and with well, I don't know what weather forecast they read, but with the weather forecasts that have been generally over the weekend, I would think that was slightly optimistic.
Yeah, that the weather is still a bit overcast, but it does look an awful lot brighter than it did before. I don't know, I would think that these people will be biting their nails, looking at the sky at the moment, working out what to do. 3-hour race, they normally stop around about the 1st hour and the 2nd hour on the hour somewhere, and then decide what to do at that point, change drivers or leave a driver in, change tyres, etc. But if they feel it's going to dry, and it looks at the moment as though it is going to dry, then they may have to bring them in a little bit earlier, because if it does dry out, these wet tyres they've got on there at the moment are not going to last very long at all. So all these team managers standing on the pit wall, I'm sure, are looking at the sky to work out what to do. But I can see them doing a lot of worrying at the moment.
Anthony Kumpen given a stop-and-go penalty, and that will be, I would think, for jumping the start, David. He was certainly rolling very well ahead of the field. Now, as the poleman, it's his prerogative to go when he wants to, except that, as the safety car pulled off, he should really have waited for the red lights to go off before the race was declared live, and clearly, in the estimation of the stewards, if not of Monsieur Kumpen himself, he didn't.
It certainly looked at the start, he just took off when everybody else is still sitting there waiting to work out what to do. Yes, once the pace car pulls off, it's up to the poleman to take charge, but they should still remain at a slow speed until those red lights are turned to green, and at that point they should start to accelerate. Normally that doesn't happen until the cars are very close to the lights. That simply didn't happen there, and Kumpen just took off and had a big lead when he got to the first corner.
Well, Jamie Campbell-Walter in the Lister Storm in 2nd place by 7.6 seconds. Last graphic we saw, he was behind those 2 Vipers there, and he was 9.8 behind. So not only has he picked up those 2 places, but as conditions have got better, he's picked up some speed as well. The 21 car, the Racing Box GLPK Viper rather, Wim Deens, the Belgian, starting that car here. Don't forget that car was too badly damaged in practice at Monza to start the race, and he's got a battle on his hands there with the 3 NGT class leaders. Jamie Campbell-Walter now homing in on Mike Hazelman's out front with just 7 laps gone. Vincent Vos and Anthony Kumpen 3rd and 4th, and Kumpen and Duez, Naspetti and Duez in the Ferraris 5th and 6th, ahead of Bouchou, Didier Defourny in the 3rd of the Belmondo cars, then Jean-Pierre Jarier in the French Championship winning Viper that we saw for the first time in the FIA series at Magny-Cours last year. And Jarier, well, he's got Francois Lafon as his teammate, who will be steady during the middle stint. I would imagine that Jarier will take the car as long as he possibly can on fuel and then get back into it as early as he possibly can, with Lafont doing the pure minimum here, particularly in these conditions, because David, for a gentleman who is an enthusiast driver as opposed to a hardened professional, these are very, very tricky conditions indeed.
They are indeed. A lot of these cars out here, especially in the NGT class, have got one, shall we say, professional driver and one gentleman driver, and these gentleman drivers do not relish driving in these conditions. They're here to have some really nice time, and they like nice sunny circuits, and they go out there with lovely cars and they have a nice time. Now that's not happening here at Brno. These conditions are making life very difficult for them, so what they're going to do is they're going to do the absolute minimum, as Martin said. So the professional driver will go out and start there, will run as long as he can. So if the car will run, say, for an hour, over an hour and 10, hour and 20 minutes, they'll do that, and then they'll bring the car in, maybe a 50-minute stint in the middle for the gentleman driver, bring it back in, put the professional driver back in to finish it off, and that way they'll try and get the best, because these professional drivers, while they enjoy their racing tremendously, they're not always the quickest people out there.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that they are very worried generally about getting in the way of the fast cars and ruining the race for everybody else, and that's something none of them will want to know about. Now, we mentioned Julian Bailey's car was caught in the pits at the start. Let's hear the reason now from his co-driver, Nicolas Springer.
Julian started in the car from pit lane. What was the problem exactly?
There was a slight mistake in the timekeeping, and the pit lane was suddenly closed, so we started from the pit lane.
Nothing more serious than that, no mechanical problem, just the problem that you were late?
No, nothing serious, nothing. It was just timekeeping error, and that was it. That's racing.
Thank you.
Or in fact, that's starting from the pit lane, as the case may be. So Nicolas Springer will take over in the middle. And you mentioned if you can get the car to go an hour and 10, an hour and 20. We thought that if the race had been a real hot contest in Monza, that all the teams, well, they were saying privately that they would have been very carefully watching the fuel gauges right towards the end of the Monza race. In these conditions, though, David, you're using part throttle a lot more. You're not really nailing the car out of the corners, and that means presumably that the fuel will go a lot longer, and we probably won't see anybody needing fuel before the hour mark, and quite possibly longer. So I don't think fuel is going to be much of an issue in this race, is it?
No, certainly not in these conditions. These conditions mean, as you said, a lot of part throttle, and it's a full throttle position that uses all the fuel in these cars. So while along the straight, yes, you can get that full throttle on, but during the majority of this twisty 5-kilometre circuit, there's going to be a lot of part throttle positions, and fuel just simply won't be an issue. They're going to have so much fuel left at the end of the 3-hour race compared to what they normally have, that some of that strategy and how quick can they do the pit stops and various things like this will come into play as the race progresses.
Jamie Campbell-Walter's strategy including cruising under the pit wall, or not cruising but racing under the pit wall there, desperately searching out the wettest parts of the track to keep these tyres alive. The real pit stop strategy, of course, will likely be determined by what the weather is doing, because as David mentioned earlier, if it gets dry, these wet weather tyres will be destroyed in a very short stretch of time. And the drivers now trying desperately to stay on the wet part of the track. That is helping the tyres remain cool, and it's stopping the edges of the tread blocks from being destroyed. And the problem is, not only is there less rubber on the road because of the grooves in the middle of the tyres, so the actual contact patch is smaller with a wet weather tyre than with a dry weather tyre, so the absolute grip level in the dry goes down, even though the compound is softer. The real problem then occurs is, suddenly if it rains, you've got pretty much bald tyres again, and they do about as much for you as a slick. Now, it is clearly getting dry. You can see Mike Hazelman's here weaving around in a manner that he would not normally approve of, and Jamie Campbell-Walter doing the same. Let's have a look on the windscreen. The odd spit and spot, but probably half of those still hanging in the air from the progress of the Viper.
Yeah, the windscreen's still dirty from what he's been following and passing cars, etc. But there's very little in the way of snow and rain coming down here at the moment. So it certainly looks as though it's going to get a lot drier than it has been. And as we said, the minute it gets drier, those nice soft wet tyres, they're going to move around on those blocks that are cut into the tyre. And the minute they start doing that, they will lose grip and start to disintegrate. So maybe they have to come in early for slick tyres if it dries out even more.
It's a vicious circle as well, of course, because the more you start to lose the grip, the more the car slides around and the tyres get dug to bits, and the more they get dug to bits, the less grip you have, and so on and so on and so on. Again, both of them right up by the pit wall, looking for that water. There's a good shot from Jamie's car as he comes back onto the racing line. Now, preservation of the tyre is more important than a couple of tenths of a second per lap. And since Hasemans is doing exactly the same, they're pretty much running at the same pace. Some parts of the track, David, still streaming wet. You can see big rooster tails there, but then again he comes down into the braking area where he's back online and no spray at all. So it's working, keeping their tyres alive, but whether they can continue to do this for another 45 or 50 minutes until they get to the sort of pit window they want remains to be seen. Well, we're going to take a short commercial break in a moment. Mike Hasemans losing time all the time to Jamie Campbell-Walter for the lead of this race. And is that a Ferrari in third place now? No, Vincent Vos is in third place, so that in fact is the Veith Ferrari, which has been lapped. The Naspetti and Duez cars in 5th and 6th. Stay with us for the Super Racing Weekend. Welcome back to the Super Racing Weekends. We're at Brno in the Czech Republic, round 2 of the FIA GT Championship, and well, just look at the way the weather has changed through the portion of the race. The main middle section of the race saw it dry right out, then another couple of rain and snowstorms. It dried out again, and then back to wet weather. Mike Hasemans in your own Brno Molen's Carsport Holland car has led almost all the way. Vincent Vos and Boris de Richebourg, Paul Belmondo, and the Racing's Didier Deforny and Emmanuel Clerico, from Christophe Bouchou and Jean-Philippe Belloc in the Laber competition car. And then Jamie Campbell-Walter is currently lying in 5th position, having taken back the Lister Storm from Richard Dean for this closing stint. We are trying to get some graphics on screen for you from the Czech Republic. Your own Brno Molen in the number 3 Carsport Holland machine is your race leader. Mike Hasemans doing a good, strong job with that car. And David, the sky is still very, very threatening, even though it looks to be an awful lot drier now. Actually, on the racetrack, there's very little in the way of spray.
Yes, you can see the spray's disappeared altogether. In the middle section, it really did pour down with rain. And these guys are all sticking to their wet tyres. But as you can see, it's drying out all the time. The spray's almost disappeared completely, and these guys are getting down to trying to do a good job. But as you see, they're trying to move over to whatever wet part of the circuit, whatever damp part. You can even see it nearly drying out on the racing lines. You have an actual dry line, and that's one thing that these guys don't really want at the moment with their wet tyres.
Well, they're coming up behind the second of the Lister Storms. That's Julian Bailey and Nicholas Springer's car, and he is currently down in 10th position, and that in fact is behind the lead NGT car as well as most of the GTs. The lead NGT car is David Terrian and Christian Pescatori's Ferrari. Now, only one of the JMB competition Ferraris here this weekend, but going very well indeed, and at the moment going better than any of the Porsches. So the NGT leader, the first time this season at least, is the Ferrari. But still the Hasemans car is out front, and I would venture that it's Nicholas Springer probably still at the wheel of the Lister, in for what will surely be his final pit stop, unless the weather really goes horribly wrong, is Jeroen Bleekemolen. 3 Bleekemolens in the competition. His father Michael sharing the other Carsport Holland with his older brother. And David peering as the cameraman follows the drivers. We don't want him to do that. That's what we want to see. They are changing tyres. Nobody changed tyres in their first pit stops, which came after around an hour and 10, an hour and 15 minutes of racing. Intermediates, David.
Yes, they look as though they're going to put these intermediates. This is a tyre halfway between a slick and a wet. and it will work very nicely on this drying circuit. We've got 2 hours and 25 minutes of the race gone, so we've got some 35 minutes of the race left. Off comes that wet. That was a wet tyre that came off. On goes the intermediate. They're banking on it not drying out fully, so they're going to go for the safety of having intermediate rather than taking a big gamble and putting a slick on. I can see some of the teams further down this field taking that gamble and putting a slick on the basis that on the last sort of 10-15 minutes it'll be really dry, and then they can make a real move forward with the grip that they'll have with the slick tyres. But there we are, as fast as possible. Once the fuel's in, then they can start and change the tyre, so when the fuel man comes off, they'll jack the car up, take the wheels off. They're only allowed 2 people to do that on the car, 1 on either side, so you can see them running from the back wheel to the front wheel and vice versa. There he is, all 4 wheels changed, now on to intermediate, so the lap times will start to tumble at this point, and we'll see just how fast this car goes. But it'll be interesting now to find out who else is going to come in and exactly what tyres they're going to put on. Here we see the Labra car, which was really struggling at the beginning of this race. I don't know why, but it must have been on a very different suspension setting, and it was slipping and sliding around and dropped way down the field to about 8th position.
Well, again, the chances possibly that they might have gambled on things not getting so wet and possibly started on intermediates. But David, even that brief shot we saw of the car sports tyres, I thought those wets, considering they've been on the car now for the better part of 2 hours, or in fact over 2 hours, were in remarkably good condition.
Yes, they were. It just shows how much rain and how wet it actually was out there. Well, we didn't think it was terribly wet at the beginning of the race. Obviously in the centre section it was lashing it down with rain, but they've managed to preserve them by moving over off that racing line onto the wet bit, and you can see quite often all the way around this circuit that people will move away off the racing line, or suddenly, because they're in the middle of the road instead of where you would expect them to be at the edge of the road, to try and keep those tyres in as good a condition as possible, to try and get as far through the race as possible in order to make a decision as late as possible to find out what to do for the last stint.
Now, depends really what the stopwatch tells us, but if the weather is starting to clear away and the sky looks as though it may have enough blue patches in, I'm sure we will see some gambling on slicks. And one of those, I would have to say, I bet you, is going to be Julian Bailey, down in the bottom end of the top 10, and not where he would like to be. And if there's any chance of turning this race around for Julian, it'll be to take slicks and to try and live with it. They'll see, I'm sure, what the car sport machine is doing in terms of lap times after a couple of laps out on the track. Jeroen Bleekemolen did a good job in the middle to hold on to the race lead. Let's hear from him now.
What happened exactly?
Yeah, we had to come in because we had no fuel anymore, and also the tires were completely gone, so we had to come in. But I think Mike is going to go quick, so now, yeah, maybe he can win it.
You're confident that it won't just be a podium, it will be a victory?
Yeah, well, it was difficult to drive because, yeah, the tires were rain tires. It was almost dry, but in the end it was okay, but it was very difficult. It was my first long-distance race, so it was really, yeah, it was really difficult for me, but okay.
Well done anyway, thank you, Joe.
Yeah, well done indeed to young Jeroen Bleekemolen. He is, as he says, in his first long-distance race, because the cars didn't make it into Monza, and his previous experience up to this stage, well, it's been nothing more tremendous than a 20-lapper in Formula 3, so it's a very, very different kettle of fish. Jean-Philippe Belloc, then, in the Labra competition car, is the new leader. Don't quite see how that will have happened unless both of the Belmondo racing cars are in the pits, and we didn't see that. They may be, but we haven't seen them come in yet. Right behind him is Jamie Campbell-Walter and Richard Dean's Lister Storm. Now the Labra competition car, if we get to see them, still squirreling around there as he's trying to unleash all of that horsepower. Jean-Philippe Belloc and Boris de Richterberg still being shown as first and second. And yes, David pointing out that Richard Dean has dived into the pits. Now the Viper, Lister Storm, I beg your pardon, went 1 hour and 10 minutes on its first tank. It's now done 1 hour on its second tank, and there are 50 minutes left to go. That sounds like time to get Jamie Campbell-Walter in the car, and I'm sure that Richard Dean was pretty much out of tyres as well by that stage. So at the moment, it's the 12 and 11 Belmondo cars first and second. Jean-Philippe Belloc third place here, and the Lister Storm has dived into the pits. Jean-Philippe Belloc continuing in the middle stint for Labre competition. Christophe Bouchou will take over at the end. Bouchou didn't take tyres for the pit stop either, or the car didn't take tyres for the pit stop either. So for the first pit stop, and so they, like everybody else, still struggling along on their wet tyres. And I'm sure during the middle stint, all those drivers who didn't have the wet tyres taken off and maybe intermediates put on were pretty darn glad of it, David. Intermediates were not the thing to have in all that rain and snow.
Certainly not. It just, the skies opened and down came the rain in the centre section, and you definitely needed the rain tyres. But as the race is progressing now, we're discovering, we can see on the circuit, you can see the lighter coloured patches of the tarmac on the circuit. That's a dry part of the circuit, and those with the intermediates, the first one we've seen, Hazelman going out there with his intermediates, he'll be on those dry patches all the time, and the rest of the people, they'll try and run across them and use them a little bit in the corners, but certainly down the straights they'll pull offline and try and keep the tyres as cool as possible. So we can see the Labre car there using round the corners and then immediately moving offline to try and get a wet line back onto the dry line for the corners. But all the time this circuit is getting drier and drier by the second.
Certainly is, and that means that it's more and more destructive to the wet weather tyres, and more likely that everybody will take some kind of slick compound tyre, whether it's a full slick or they're an intermediate, which is essentially a slick compound but with grooves cut in just to move away that last little bit of water. So the Vipers continue out front. The Lister Storm has been in and out of the pits. We've had a number of people asking about the Lister Storm, questions generally around why don't we see it at Le Mans, why don't we see it in the American Le Mans series. Well, the simple fact of the matter is it's racing in the FIA GT series under special dispensation. It's a little bit of a historic anomaly, in fact, the Lister Storm's participation here. It's not allowed to race in the American Le Mans series, and we had another question as to why the Carsport Holland cars weren't at Donington Park in the European Le Mans race. Well, that's because they would have missed qualifying in the Czech Republic, and the FIA GT Championship is their first priority. An occasional European Le Mans race, if it doesn't clash, will be their second. 28 minutes and counting in this race, well past the 2-hour mark, and now into the closing stages. Race started at 20:12 Central European time, so we're into the last half hour.
It's unusual for these cars to go this actual distance without coming into the pits for their last pit stop. Normally they can do an hour and 5 minutes, and that gives them just enough time to get to the finish without having to refuel. That certainly happened in Monza, and they were right on the empty as they finished the race there. But here with these conditions, because they're not using as much fuel at all, then they've been able to stretch the first pit stop to something like an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes, which means the second one's around about the 2.5 hours, which is where we are now. So we've seen the first of the cars, the Hazelman car, in there, and we've seen the Lister car diving into the pit, so it's changed, but we didn't see, in actual fact, was what tyres actually went onto that Lister car. So we're not sure exactly what Jamie's out there at the moment, but certainly I would think anyone further back from the lead would be more likely to take that risk and fit slicks in order to get that best.
Well, here's the current classification then. Our timing and scoring monitor is showing the Hazelman's car as the leader, but it's Belloc, de Richebourg, Hazelman's, with Campbell Walter next up. Mimo Schiattarella in the Ferrari in 5th place, and the second Ferrari is in 6th position. In the last half hour of the FIA GT race at Brno in the Czech Republic, and reliable sunshine, something that has not been a feature of the race weekend, but the sun is shining finally, and it looks as though we may have seen the last of the rain and the snow, at least for this race, and that's good news for all the runners, never mind the guys in the most powerful cars who have had most of the struggle. In the pits are race leader Vincent Voss and Boris de Richebourg's number 12 Belmondo Racing Viper. David trying to glean some information from what's written on the sidewalls of the Dunlop tyres, and it looks as though the pits might start to become a busy place. Because of the wet weather, the cars going minimum of an hour and 10 minutes in their first stint, and even longer in the even worse conditions of the second part of the race, which takes them not to normally just before the 2-hour mark, which is where you'd expect to see them make their final change, but well into nearly 2.5 hours into this race. And that means that the short final stint is almost certain to be on different tyres, and that will give the drivers who do the final stint a chance perhaps to race in good conditions. Tamas Ilias in 6th place in his Viper, and that's a very good showing so far from those guys. This is the Labra competition car. It's been hit by stones that somebody's thrown up, broken windscreen with a little bit of sun glare. Doesn't help much, does it, when you're driving?
Not at all. It's you want the least sun possible to be able to see out, especially in these conditions when it's been wet and it's now drying. What I just can't quite understand at the moment is the circuit is drying hard all the time, and this wiper is still going on this Labra car, and everybody else has switched their wipers off, and I'm not sure, maybe the switch is broken or something, and that's why it's still running, but that can't be helping his viewing out of there, because that keeps on going, and it'll keep on scratching the window and make life a little bit more difficult for him to see out of there.
And we saw quite clearly, or we heard quite clearly, in fact, during the Car Sport Holland car, the squeaking of the wiper on the windscreen. Now, that's over the sound of the racing, so you can tell just how much the wipers are really suffering in those conditions. There you are, Tupney Halkney switch probably coming off in his hands there and rolling around on the cockpit floor at the moment, I should think. So I'm sure that Jean-Philippe Belloc will not particularly need the wiper. Nobody else seems to. Well, the car's looking much more stable than we've seen them, I think, at really any time over the weekend, David, and almost getting to a stage where you could pretty much say there's reasonable grip all the way around.
This is something they've not been used to this weekend at all. They've managed to have one dry session when they arrived there, and that's all. And since then we've had the snow and we've had the rain and we've had even more snow. But so these cars will really be not what they were expecting. They didn't get a good dry setup on most of the cars. They just had that one-hour session very early on, and the rest of the time they've been trying to set the car up for the damp and wet conditions. So a lot of these cars will not be as they would expect them for a completely dry race, but nevertheless, having only some 20-odd minutes left of this race, they're well settled into it. They should be very used to it by now. The majority of the people should have been into the pits or are in the pits to have their last pit stop, get those tyres changed either to the intermediates or into the slicks.
Number 12 machine is still in the pits. There you can see our NGT leader, the JMB competition Ferrari. We saw the Belmondo car in the pits, and it's still there, so if they're having trouble maybe getting it restarted under its own power, maybe having the wiper and lights on all the way through the races, overcome what feeble alternator is usually supplied to keep the battery charged up. These cars must start under their own power as part of the Le Mans regulations. Well, we see that the Hazeman's car is still leading, and good onboard camera shot here showing that although it is a little bit grey and damp, you wouldn't want to make too many passing places offline. The Ferrari finding plenty of traction. Gunther Bleilinger showing this car with the Belgian Marc Duez, and they've got a crack in their windscreen as well, so clearly in the wet conditions a few cars going off, chucking gravel onto the track, and that has been thrown up and broken windscreens. And the number 6 car, I'm afraid I can't tell you where the positions are at the moment because our timing and scoring system has completely given up the ghost. The latest I've got is that they were in 9th place, 2 laps down on the leaders. But that was after the leaders had completed 45 laps, which is before the pit stop started, so I'm afraid that's not much use to man nor beast. However, this wasn't the quicker of the Ferraris, but still a nice chance to look around the circuit. And we seem to have sound and vision tied up fairly nicely here, David. Noticeable, of course, the sequential gearbox. Push forward to change down, pull back to change up.
This gearbox makes life very easy for these racing cars. Gearboxes in endurance racing are the one thing that do tend to suffer a little bit, especially if you miss a gear here and there, then all of a sudden you take a tooth off somewhere. But with the sequential change gearbox, you can see that lever just sticking up there in the centre. They simply push it and they pull it, and that changes up and changes down. Quite often in these cars they have a little switch on the gear lever itself, which allows you to change up without actually lifting off the throttle. So you can actually change up while still flat out. So it makes life just that little bit easier, that little bit quicker, and everything's just so much neater. You can see in the car earlier when he was changing up some of the corners. We'd change up quite early, and you'd see low revs. The reason for doing this is to try and keep the wheel spin down to a minimum as you're trying to get out of the tighter corners, the chicane corners. You've seen the car going through there. So it's what we call changing up early, trying to get the traction as best as possible to get out of that corner.
And of course a big normally aspirated engine, plenty of torque there as well to pull you through. Dieter Questa, our NGT leader now, which means I think that the Ferrari must have gone in for its final change. Well, the 12 car in the pits for a very long stop. Let's see if we can find out why from Boris de Richebourg.
Boris, you're currently in 4th position. Do you think that you'll be able to get onto the podium?
Yeah, we hope so. We went for slick right now at the last stint. So we hope it's going to be a good show. Otherwise, we're going to be forced, but for sure, Vincent now is right up there. He's very quick. He's probably 10 seconds quicker than everybody because of the slicks. So we hope it's going to be a good choice, and then we build the podium. Hope so. Should be all right.
Thank you, Boris.
Well, David, as predicted, somebody somewhere with not an awful lot to lose and plenty to gain has gone for slicks, and they were in the top 2 before the pit stop started, so those guys now down to 4th after their stop and going 10 seconds a lap quicker. Confirmation, if it were needed, that slicks are the tyre, but the tyre of the moment. Now the question is, how much will that really be hindering the Carsport car on its intermediates?
Well, he says 10 seconds a lap at the moment, and if it's 10 seconds a lap quicker than everybody else out there, it means the rest of the cars that have been in so far are also out there on intermediate tyres, and they're obviously the first team that's taken that risk to go to slicks. And certainly the people further back down the field that weren't right up at the sharp end, they're the ones that could and can afford to take the risk. Certainly if you're leading a race, there's nothing in this world would make you take a risk with a motor race because you want to win it, so you will take the easy option, and that's what the Hazelman car has done. It's taken the easy option. It's gone with the intermediate tyres because they know it's going to be safe, and there we are, one of the Bermelda cars with Vincent inside there, Vincent Voss. He's out there. 10 seconds a lap is a long time, and you can pull a lot of places back with 10 seconds a lap.
Certainly can. I have to say, it looks as though they came in when they were in the top 3, and it looks as though they are just going for everything they can get. On board with Johnny Cecotto and his teammate for the weekend, a new teammate this weekend, Andrea Chiesa, the ex-Formula 3000 driver. Cecotto shared with Philip Pater at Monza, and Pater off on another clashing commitment this weekend. Won't be able to do all the series. Johnny Cecotto, they certainly hope at Auto Orlando will be able to. And they won first time out. New team, new car, new combination at Monza, and very happy indeed with that result. Well, there is the car that for the major part of the midsection of the race led the NGT class, the Ferrari. And David's still looking for a bit of rain or a bit of water.
These cars out there are still looking for whatever water they can get. We can see the front of that car has obviously had some damage at some point. Either he's run into the back of a slower car, or he has actually fallen off at some point. There's a great lump missing out of that front end of that Ferrari there. So while they're out there and it looks as though they're in the lead at the moment, I'm sure they'll be praying that nothing else goes wrong or no more bits and pieces fall off, and the bits that are left there at the front are still well fixed on. Otherwise it could end up losing the whole of the front bumper, which won't do them any good whatsoever.
Well, they've dropped down since their pit stop in the NGT class. Dieter Questa leading in the 77 Red Bull car, which had a bit of a torrid time at Monza. So the Ferrari, having looked strong in the mid part of the race with 15 minutes left to go, now floundering further down in the order. And I'm afraid our timing and scoring still showing us nothing. The Bouchou car leads at the moment, though, from the Carsport Holland machine. Vincent Voss is in 3rd, of course, on those slick tyres. Jamie Campbell-Walter in 4th place in the Lister Storm. Then Naspetti and Schiattarella's Ferrari. And then the Dames and Ilias GLPK Racing Viper is in 6th position. In NGT, it's still Dieter Questa leading in the 77 car. There he is. The Ferrari is in 2nd place. So they've still got a podium position on the cards. But whether they can now hold a car any lights to the Porsches remains to be seen. And I'm sure a lot of that in the end, David, is going to come down to what rubber is on what car.
Yes, certainly. The big problem is that the NGT cars will probably try and go through this race with one stop. So, you know, they may not come in unless they decide to take that big time difference, come in, lose that time in order to put the slicks on and try and gain more from that. But that to me is a very big risk with only something like 15, 17 minutes of this race left.
It is probably too late to make any of those kind of last-minute gambles. You can't rely on an American-style yellow flag, but there goes the NGT leader. He spins the lead away. Tim Sugden goes back by him. That's not a position change, but where is the Ferrari? How far behind? Well, in comes the second-place car now. Having just said it's probably too late to gamble, Mike Hasemans has decided that intermediates are going to kill his car and give him no chance of competing for a podium position, and he'll be better off losing a minute and going on to slicks, because he'll get that minute back in 5 laps or so of running on slick tyres compared to what he was doing on intermediates. So a last-minute roll of the dice for the Car Sport Holland guys. Drama in both classes shaping up in the final 15 minutes of this race. The NGT leader spins off, and surely then that must mean that he's not on the right tyres for these conditions. And Hasemans comes in from second to take a gamble on slicks. And that leaves our race leader as Christophe Bouchou, surely on intermediate tyres and running slower than the cars chasing him. Dramatic moments as we come towards the close of this FIA GT race, because Christophe Bouchou, his car out front, but his closest challenger, Mike Hasemans in the Car Sport Holland machine, has gone in for a third pit stop to take on slick tyres. Now let's catch up with the retirement of Emmanuel Clerico.
Place, about to challenge for the lead, and what happened?
I think it's a fuel problem, because the engine stopped. I tried to bring back the car, but it was impossible. I was in 6th gear, and I had only the ralenti on the engine, so I was bop. But I still have 20 liters on the dashboard, so we don't know. We follow the constant motion all the run, so I was supposed to stop in 2 laps to make the slick tires, because I saw it was faster with the slick, and I think it would have been a win, but...
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Well, more dramas then. It's starting to turn into a bit of a lottery, this race. The 12 car on slick tyres, we know, with Vincent Vos up into third place. Fastest lap 2:04.749, now getting down to the sort of times that they managed in the best of the practice conditions.
Compared to what they were running about 2 minutes 20 earlier on, this is obviously a massive change, and everybody at the very last minute here at the end of this race, with 11 minutes to go, or just over 11 minutes to go, are suddenly making those decisions to take the extra pit stop, put on the slick racing tyres. When you can make a difference of over 10 or even 15 seconds a lap on some of these cars, then it doesn't take very long to get that time back when you're spending 30, 40, 50 seconds in the pits for a quick change.
Well, I did speculate at the beginning of this race that it was going to be 2 hours and 40 minutes of survival and see what position you were in the final 20 minutes, and that's where we are now, inside the final 10 now. Belloc leads, but on knackered tyres, surely. Vos closing on slicks, Hasemans closing on slicks. Campbell Walter, well, I don't know what he's on, but he's in 4th place, and the Ferrari's running in 5th and 6th. The NGT leader is still the 77 Porsche. The Ferrari, the JMB 62 car you see there, in 2nd place in NGT and closing after the leader's spin. Welcome back into the dying minutes of the FIA GT race at Brno, round 2 of the championship, and the Labra competition car still leading from the Car Sport Holland Viper in 2nd place. Bouchou versus Hasemans. In 3rd place, Vincent Vos, the number 12 car, now up to 2nd place after Hasemans came in for a 3rd tyre stop. That was after their normal changes. In their final change, or was planned to be final change, he took on intermediates, and clearly a matter of 5 or 10 laps told him that was not the tyre to have. Slicks were the thing to have, and he now has those. The question is, will it be in time? David Leslie, he's got a lot of chasing to do, and the clock is against him rather than any other factor, and that's one of those things that is very hard to deal with. Well, Christophe Bouchou in the pits at the moment, so his car out on track, and he will be watching with interest to see how that battle ends up. Let's hear now from Christophe Bouchou.
Christophe, just 10 minutes left now. You must be confident of victory.
Yes, we are really happy because the car is very good in dry condition. It was not good on the wet condition in the beginning of the race, and I was a bit disappointed, but the objective was to stay and to drive well and to stay on the racetrack, to do any mistake. So I'm very happy, but we need now again to stay on the racetrack in first position during, I don't know, 7 minutes. I cross the finger. I hope everything will be good.
Thank you, Christophe.
So I'm sure all of the team will cross the finger. Christophe Bouchou is Jean-Philippe Belloc at the helm, and this is the car that's most of a threat to them. Vincent Voss closing them down as he charges hard on his slicks. Now, what we could really have done with Simon asking in the pits was what tyres Bouchou's car was on, because that might have given us a clue as to how this final 6 or 7 minutes would go, David. He still seems to be able to turn in the lap times, 2:08s. That's not bad. The chasing car doing 2:04s.
It's not bad, but unfortunately it's not quite good enough. I take an educated guess that they're still out there on intermediates. They came in and took that decision a little bit earlier, and they've decided to stay out there. As you said, they've got some 7 minutes left, and they've got their fingers crossed that they can simply hang on and keep on going sufficiently quick enough to be able just to get it to the finish and get it there in first place. The others have taken the risk. I mean, Hazelmans, who's led this race for such a long time now, is now down in third place. They took that extra pit stop to try and put on the slick tyres, but they did a little bit late, and Voss was out there first with the slicks, and he was, as we heard earlier, some 10 seconds a lap faster than the other cars with their intermediate. So now we've got these Belloc on first, Vincent Voss in second, and Hazelman in third, and now 1 lap down is Jamie Campbell-Walter, and we feel that he's probably on the intermediate tyres as well, because he wasn't that far down to start with before the pit stop. So immediately after the pit stop, he's been obviously losing time to the guys out there on the slicks. So he certainly will not be moving any further up, we don't think. But there we are watching the leader now, Belloc out there, and he's trying very hard to hang on to the front of this race. Just a few more minutes left. But unfortunately, as each minute goes past, then the cars behind them, both the Vincent Voss car and the Michael Hazelman car, they're catching him hand over fist, and we're looking now as far back as possible. We can't quite see this, so at least the lead of that start line straight at the moment, and on basis they're doing just over 2 minutes a lap. That's something like 3 laps left before they get there. And if there's live picture here, we can see them now. This is the second car coming into the start and finish straight now, so that's quite a good lead they've got. If they're still taking something like 4 or 5 seconds lap off from per lap, he might just make it, but at the end of this race it's going to be very, very close indeed.
It is indeed. So what looked like a comfortable lead for the number 7 car eked into in the middle stages of the race. The Carsport Holland car taking the lead and then running away with the race in the poor conditions. And still to be answered the question as to what happened to Christophe Bouchou at the start of the race. Maybe the fact that he's running reasonably quickly now on intermediate tyres, where clearly the slicks are quicker, means that the setup of the car lent more towards drying conditions than wet conditions. I can't believe that Bouchou really just couldn't drive in those early few laps when the car just plummeted down the order. Carsport Holland car there in third place. You saw Jamie Campbell-Walter coming across the start-finish line as Mike Hazelmans was turning into the first corner. So Campbell-Walter in fourth place, and reasonably close, within sight, but not, I don't think, with a shot of a podium finish.
The cars here now, you can see on the circuit, it's totally dry out there, so those people that have been in and taken that gamble on the slicks was certainly the right thing to do, but as we said earlier, it was definitely a gamble. It wasn't something that you would automatically have done, and Mike Hazelmans decided on the intermediate when he came in earlier than most for their tyre change, and those that hung on to use as much of their fuel as possible were able to come in and make that slightly better decision to go onto the slick racing tyres. That's made all the difference.
sixth place for the Ferrari, and I have to say that if he's on intermediates, they seem to be holding on pretty well, able to use all the power he wants to, braking nice and late, and look at his hands on the wheel, nice comfortable radius around the corner, and that means the thing is tracking pretty much where he wants it to. Marc Duez, the Belgian, back at the wheel of the sixth place Ferrari, and both the Raffinelli cars on for a top six finish, which is excellent news for that young team. Not in terms of the real world, but in terms of the FIA world, certainly. Raffinelli only 2 races into this championship. 2 laps to go as we are within the final 5 minutes of the race. The Carsport Holland car, Mike Heesemans, sharing with Jeroen Bleekemolen, and he is in 3rd place. The gap there, 26.2 between 1st and 2nd place, and I think that Jean-Philippe Belloc in the lead Labre competition Viper has got plenty enough to answer any challenge of Vincent Voss. We heard Christophe Bouchou hoping that their slicks will be enough to carry them to the front, but whatever is on the Labre competition car, whether it's slicks or intermediates, they've got enough in hand, David, and I don't think they're going to be caught unless something really silly happens, like he gets nudged from behind by a recently passed NGT car.
These things are all possible. That's what makes this GT racing so exciting. It isn't won until you cross that line, and things do go wrong and can go wrong on the last lap. But there we are, you can see the lead car out there now. He definitely is on the intermediates. He's going slowly around the corners. He's trying to make those tyres last till the end of the race. 26 seconds ahead with 2 laps to go, and I think he's going to be able to hang in there and get to the finish. So although the car looked terrible at the beginning of the race, and the car went from the front of the grid all the way back to about 8th position, certainly having it set up, or it looks as though it was set up for a more dry track rather than a very wet track, then it's paid dividends towards the end. But that was a big risk to take to do that. It's paid off. I'm not sure I would have done it that way. I'd have gone the way the rest of the cars have gone, and made sure that I could cope with the very wet conditions that are out there. We can see the team there just hoping that they can get through what looks like now the very last lap of this race, and he gets to the finish of this lap before the Vincent Voss, Paul Belmondo entered car can get to him. Then he's going to be an extremely happy man at the end of this race.
I think so, and it'll be a job well done by all of those finishing in competitive positions, because when you look offline you can see not just the little tiny bits of rubbed off rubber that you normally see, but great chunks, huge solid tyre blocks and strips of tyre around the side of the track, and that shows you how hard the drivers have worked to keep their tyres going and to keep to a relatively normal pit stop strategy in what were very difficult and very changeable conditions. So full marks indeed to the Labre competition crew. Christophe Bouchou doing the first 2 stints, and to bring the car to the line, Jean-Philippe Belloc, who drove last year, of course, for the Belmondo racing team. And look at those, see those big bits of rubber you see, not just in the corners, but all over the place. One more lap is the gesture he's making, and I think he may be wrong. According to my watch, we have reached 2:40 Central European time, which is 3 hours after the race started, but then it's only my watch, and that's not what we run international motor racing on, sadly. So
we're pretty sure here that this is the last lap, and they've got very little distance to go now up this hill. There's a left-hander at the top of it, then a right-hander, and then that's them onto the start and finish straight. So here we are into the second last corner.
And again, you can see all those big lumps of rubber in the middle of the road. All those blocks of tyre that have just been thrown off as the wet weather tyres have finally given up. And he's being pushed hard by the NGT car, but he won't care. Coming to take the checkered flag after 3 hours of racing, the Labre competition car wins. And Jean-Philippe Belloc, position number 1 on his board. There is Christophe Bouchou, who sowed the seeds for victory, handing over the lead car to Belloc for the final stint. And in second place will be the number 12 car, Vincent Voss and Boris de Richebourg's machine. Oh, and he's weaving side to side. I don't know whether that was a little salute to the team or the fact that he's got no fuel left. But the Labre competition team win in the GT class. And in third place will be car number 3, and that's the Carsport Holland Viper. So it's Vipers 1, 2 and 3. No podium finish for the Lister Storm team, but Christophe Bouchou will be very happy with that, as will Jean-Philippe Belloc. And I think after the disasters and disappointments of Monza, although Mike Hasemans and Jeroen Bleekemolen will be disappointed that that extra pit stop later in the race dropped them out of the lead, it's certainly a whole lot better than 2 weekends ago at Monza. And here is the battle for NGT, and that is a real reflection of their positions. The RWS Porsche just beating the JMB Ferrari to the line, and Dieter Quester winning despite dropping the car in the final 15 minutes. Didn't put it off the road, but spun it in the first left-right sequence, right-left sequence on this Brno racetrack, and just managed to hold off the Ferrari to the end. But that will be good news for the Ferraris as well, to be competitive in these dreadful conditions. It's quite a high downforce car, the Ferrari, not as slippery as the NGT Porsche. And that meant that at Monza, where low drag is everything, they were a little bit high and dry, perversely, for an Italian car. But David, I think the Ferrari might be much more of a feature in forthcoming races.
Yes, certainly it's improving all the time. When we spoke to them at Monza, they said Monza was definitely their worst circuit, and they did struggle there a little bit with those high-speed straights. But they've gone very well here all weekend, and they've been right up there. And as we see them finish the race there, right behind the leader, so that was very good for them. And I'm pretty sure that when the race isn't quite such a lottery with the weather the way it has been today, then they're going to be up there charging right at the front and making life very difficult for the Porsche cars that have had it their own way for such a long time nowadays. Well, in comes the winner then, the GT and overall winner, Christophe Bouchou, and at the wheel, Jean-Philippe Belloc in the number 7 Chrysler Viper. Vincent Voss and Boris de Richebourg 18 seconds back. Mike Hasemans and Jeroen Bleekemolen sharing third place in the number 3 Carsport Holland Viper. In fourth spot, Jamie Campbell-Walter and Richard Dean, a minute 28 behind in the Lister Storm. And the two Ferraris, 5th and 6th positions for them, ahead of the 10 Belmondo car, the GLPK Viper in 8th place, and then the NGT winning RWS Motorsport car. The second place in NGT for Ferrari, third place in NGT for Jürgen von Gartzen and Bruno Eichmann, and all of them in the top dozen. And that very much a reflection of the wet weather conditions during this race. So Jean-Philippe Belloc with the helmet on, and teammate Christophe Bouchou first on the scene to offer his congratulations for a job well done. Good teamwork and good choice on the tyres. They struggled early on, but they managed to come through and win it.
Christophe, many congratulations. Second last week, first this time. You must be very happy.
Yeah, we are very happy because, well, first of all, it's our first win in FIA GT, and secondly, it's the second race, and it's a very good opportunity for the championship, because Lister is not second like us at first race, so for the championship it's wonderful.
Thank you, Christophe. Jean-Philippe, congratulations.
Thank you.
How was it driving in the different weather conditions today?
It was very difficult, very, very difficult, because when I started my stint in the middle of the race, I never drove this morning in the warm-up in wet conditions, so it was difficult for me to find the right pace, and my job was to try to manage the tires and to save the fuel, and because our strategy was to stop only one time for the fuel, and at the end the team decided to do another pit stop to put again the slick tires, and it was very, very good strategy. It was a perfect race. I'm very, very happy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jean-Philippe, for answering several questions there. The reason that the Viper was a bit laggardly at the beginning then, David, brimming full of fuel, and the final pit stop for slick tyres, and that was what kept them ahead at the end, because if they had been on inters, maybe they might have lost that race. So Belloc struggling in the closing stages as the track dried until his slicks became the right tyre to have, and a good drive early on from the Chirot car to preserve that fuel strategy. Well, daring strategy choices by the Chirot team give them the lead of the championship along with victory here at Brno, because they were second in Monza and first here. They now lead the championship from the Lister Storms. This is Luca Riccitelli.
How was it?
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a fantastic race. I mean, we finished, just a few tenths in front of the Ferrari after 3 hours, after this very bad condition at the beginning of the race. It's a great result for us. Dieter did a fantastic job at the end, so I'm really very, very happy.
Thank you, Luca. Well done.
Luca Riccitelli obviously not watching the TV monitors then when Dieter Questa dropped the car off the road, but he did recover from that, and as Riccitelli said, held off the Ferrari by literally tenths of a second, and after 3 hours of anybody's racing, never mind in these conditions, that's some great finishing for the Ferrari team particularly. Of course, the RWS boys, there is Dieter Questa, will be very happy with that result. They didn't do too well at Monza, and just lost out on last year's championship to the Labour competition team, but they are very much re-established as front runners, and let's see next time out at Magny-Cours whether the Ferrari can get right in among the MGT Porsches again and give us a different look to the podium. Well, that's it for the GTs, but stay with us because we've got the rest of the Super Racing Weekend action coming up in just a moment. Fourth place only for the Lister Storm means they lose the championship lead. Don't expect that to last for too long if Jamie Campbell-Walter and Lawrence Pierce have their way. Well, it doesn't need reiterating, does it? The pictures showing you the story of the race. Dreadful conditions, and in the end, inspired strategy, winning it for the Chirot Viper team. Join us for more action the other side of this break.
The FIA GT Championship. With LeasePlan. Fleet management in motion. FILATIGEL, stretching fibers, fabrics and yarns.
Welcome back to Eurosport's second Super Racing Weekend at the rain and snow-swept Brno circuit in the Czech Republic. I'm Martin Haven, alongside me David Leslie. We're going to take a look now at the Euro STC races. Nicola Larini and Fabrizio Giovanardi, the championship leaders after the first race, and it's Giovanardi who'll start from pole position in his Alfa for the first race here in this second weekend. Gabriele Tarquini outside of the front row of the grid in his Honda, but there is no Honda on the grid for Fabrice Walfisch, and we'll find out why now.
We
broke the engine during the warm-up, he said. Wasn't a mistake by me. We had no warning before the failure. It just flew, and he said, so we don't know why that happened. Go in qualifying as well on Sunday. So, ready for the start of the race, and Roberto Colciaggio diving into the lead in a manner best seen. I can't remember when I've quite seen so effective a dive between the front row men. Roberto Colciaggio, of course, in the Audi Quattro, and on this wet race, let's have a look. There he goes from third on the grid. As the front-wheel drive car sitting there spinning the wheels, he selects first gear and motors on, and the green lights show that it was a green light situation. So Roberto Colciaggio leading from Gabriele Tarquini, and the two Alfas, the Nord Auto cars. There's Giovanardi, and there's teammate Nicola Larini getting by him. David, we gave Colciaggio a little bit of stick in the damp qualifying for not being fast enough with the four-wheel drive Audi, but still used four-wheel drive to perfection there away from the line.
Without doubt, that's what we've been used to seeing from the four-wheel drive cars at start, both especially on the wet as we've seen here, but even on a dry circuit, they can just shoot off that start like it's no tomorrow, and we've seen that there. He hasn't made best use of it, and now he's got Tarquini going past the inside, or going round him up the inside. Not too good, that won't do anybody any good whatsoever.
Well, Tarquini, of course, with less efficient braking and traction than the four-wheel drive car, gets hooked up across the nose of Colciaggio, and off he goes, and here is the opposite angle, and that's a very difficult situation to get out of. Gabrielli's on the brakes there, so too is Roberto, but the accident was happening, and once that tail starts to come round like that, David, there's precious little you can do about it. Gabrielli, well, not exactly happy with the situation, but he's not a man to bear a grudge, I have to say. He'll probably go over to Roberto afterwards. And
I was controlled the race, and I think Colciaggio is completely crazy because he went into me and I went off. So at this time I was faster than him, but I mean, I play for the championship, and in this condition he have a little advantage, but I don't think that for this reason he can crash to everybody. So that's. But I mean, like Monza, I lost a lot of points, and it's a shame.
A shame indeed, and that left the race open for Nicola Larini and Fabrizio Giovanardi. And Larini sitting in the driving seat, having already passed Fab on the first lap. Nicola in the lead, but Giovanardi not sufficiently enamoured of that situation to let it remain for long. Coming up behind the back markers, trying to make a move on Larini. And Larini somehow squeezing between Giovanardi and the back marker to retake the lead. Of course, Larini is the championship points leader. Giovanardi, last year's Euro STC champion, finishing in second place as Larini wins his second race in 3 starts. So Tarquini out of the first race for the second weekend in succession. Larini and Giovanardi racking up the points once more, first and second for Alfa Romeo.
It looked as though it was a good battle at the end with Fabrizio.
Yeah, I lost my front left tires, and my car was lower 2-3 seconds compared to the beginning. But there was good fighting, and at the end I won.
Good fighting indeed, and the Nord Auto Alpha team, I'm sure, just delighted that both cars managed to avoid taking each other off in these streaming wet conditions. That would have been very easy indeed. But it's victory number 2 of the season for Nicola Larini. Back in Brno, ready for the second FIA Super Touring race. And this race now taking place live, and after the GT cars have helped to dry out the track, the Super Tourers may have a slightly easier time than they did in the first race. David, that race streaming wet and very tricky indeed. We saw Colciaggio really rocket away from the start, but thereafter, perhaps the antiquity of the Audi showing, as within half a lap, the better developed Honda and Alfa were right with him.
Yes, they caught him very quickly there, which was not good for him at all. I'd expected him to carry on in the race like he made that start. An absolutely tremendous start from back there. But it didn't work for him, and once they had that first little touch, then immediately they had the second big touch. And it's a bad thing in Super Touring cars.
There is only 10 laps. You showed in Monza that you could get to the front. Do you think that you'll be able to do it again?
I don't know. It's really difficult because it's not a quick circuit like Monza. I think I can improve my position, this is sure, but it's really difficult to win again. I try it. This is normally, but I'm not alone. There's Giovanardi in front of me. Tarquini will start just following us. So we will see, but it's not easy like Monza.
Thank you, Nicola.
Not easy like Monza, I think, is exactly right. He is starting on the inside of row 6, so in 11th position on the grid, behind the reversed order of finishers from the first race. So Szymanczyk is starting on pole position. Emilio Zadra is Paolo Zadra rather, in the BMW alongside him. And then Bernardoni in the Nord Auto Alpha, car number 3, will start on the inside of the second row of the grid, and Sergio Sambataro in another Audi Quattro will start in 4th place. Further back behind Giovanardi and Larini are Fabrice Valfish, who failed to start the first race because of a broken engine. Here he is with hopefully a more successful engine on board this time. We may be able to grab a word with him as well.
You're ready for the second race. Do you think that you'll be able to finish the race?
I don't fear anything, but
go.
Now he sits alongside Nicola Larini, the winner of the first race. There he is, and further back, well, no Gabriele Tarquini. Roberto Colciaggio is on the grid, who went off with Gabriele Tarquini in the first race, but Tarquini is starting from the pit lane, and the reason for that, I'm afraid, we do not know. In fact, I'm just being told that Colciaggio is also going to be forced to start from the pits, perhaps as a result of that earlier clash. So the grid we've been given being amended. You can see the BMW of Gianluca Di Lorenzi further back, and there he is. He also failed to finish. Sardelli went off as well, and he is further back. And Angelo Lanciolotti in the number 9 car was disqualified after the race for ignoring a black and orange flag for 4 laps, so he starts stone at last, well, apart from those who are starting from the pit lane. Gets a little confusing, doesn't it? Let's go to Fabrizio Giovanardi and see if he can make sense of some of it.
Fabrizio, you had a great race with your teammate Nicola in the first race. Do you think that you'll be able to beat him and win this second race?
I don't know. I said the same thing in the first race, but I didn't win. I will try to win, but I think we must think about all the championship is really long.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio.
I wonder if that was a plea to Nicola Larini to just calm it a little bit. He said it is a long championship. They've been helped greatly, David, really, by the problems for Gabriele Tarquini in the first race, both here and at Monza, where he didn't score any points. But it's going to be not very difficult to visualise the two of them tangling at some stage and neither of them scoring any points, and that would be a bit of a disaster for them.
Yeah, we can certainly see that happening. You can see in the races so far they've been nose to tail, and they've fought them between themselves all the way to the finish. And yes, somewhere along the line, these two very hard charging drivers are actually going to run into each other. That's not going to help the Nord Auto team a lot, but at the moment they've been right up there, because Larini has managed to beat Giovanardi each time they've been out in the 3 races they've had so far in the championship. Still only 15 points in it. Larini 115 points in the championship, with Giovanardi 100 points in the championship, first and second. But unfortunately, Gabriele Tarquini is way down in 15th place in this championship with only 40 points. So that coming together with Colciaggio in the first race we've just seen has hurt him even more than falling off himself at Monza when he jumped over the curb, lost the back end of the car and smashed it very hard into the tyre wall. So his championship, Tarquini's has started very, very badly, and the 2 Nord Auto Alphas of Nicola Larini and Giovanardi off to an absolute flying start, and I'm pretty sure while they'll find it more difficult on this circuit compared to Monza to make it through there, I'm pretty sure they'll get through to the front of the grid. It might take them a little bit longer, and on this damp and drying track, I'm sure that some of these cars in front, the slightly more inexperienced guys, are going to find it very, very difficult, and I can see a little tap here and there happening just to liven the race up a bit.
And of course, for their benefit, even if they don't get to the front, Gabriele Tarquini starts from the pit lane with therefore a distinct time disadvantage, because he won't be up to speed as these guys are accelerating into the first corner, but also half a dozen cars between even him and the tail end of the nearest Alpha. So one of those is his teammate Fabrice Valfish, but for Gabriele Tarquini it's an even more uphill struggle.
We can see them on the start line here. Now we know the racing line, when you come out of that last corner, is over onto the right hand side of the screen as we look at it, the left hand side of the circuit. So as you can see, that BMW, that very bright blue, yellow and red one, moving immediately over to try and get onto that dry line. So the people on the right hand side of the circuit, as we're looking at it, they're going to be able to get quite a good start, where the people on the left hand side are going to be on a much damper part of the circuit. So I can see the pole man certainly struggling here. And for some unknown reason, I'm talking about pole being on the left, because yesterday...
Pole on the right here. We saw yesterday that pole was on the right in the Formula Renault race, but in the dry, the left-hand line was a much, much quicker line down into the first corner. It delivered you there well up the inside of the pole man. We saw our pole man in the Formula Renault race immediately weave across to try and block off his fellow front row starter. But as you say, the advantage in traction here, and particularly because the only dry line into the first turn is way over there on the left hand side as well, means that even if you do take a run down the inside, not only are you going to be slower away on the wet grid, but you're also going to have to brake earlier on the inside wet line, and that should mean that Heinrich Szymanczyk in his Opel Vectra, who sits on pole by dint of being the last man to finish the first race, should be the leader into the first corner. But Paolo Zadra in the BMW, well, he's got a rear drive BMW, and they tend to be a little quicker off the line than the front drive cars, so maybe that will help in his favour. But ooh, look up in the sky, fluffy white clouds there and lots of them, but some big black stuff hanging around, and suddenly noticeable is the lack of sunshine, David, which we saw quite clearly at the end of the GTs. Looks like there's another bit of weather on its way.
Luckily this race is quite a short race, it's only 10 laps, so these guys will be hoping very much that it's going to be a dry race, and they really don't want in the 10 laps that they've got out there to be having another shower out there, whether it be snow or rain, but they'll want to stay on that dry piece of the circuit, that very small dry piece of the circuit. We can see there on the racing line it's okay, but there's damp parts all over the circuit.
And it is definitely getting more and more gloomy, and that may be the portent of poor weather. But I think in those conditions we'll probably see the star drivers, the Lorinis, the Giovanardis, the Tarquinis faring even better than the others, just purely on talent alone. Ready to go for the second Super Touring race at Brno. This is the fourth race of the championship, a pair of these 50-kilometre double-header races at every race weekend on the Super Racing Weekend calendar. And with 2 victories already to his credit from 3 starts, Nicola Lorini starting on the inside of row 6 on this reversed finishing order from the first race grid that starts the lineup. Roberto Colciaggio heads Gabriele Tarquini in the queue to leave the pit lane, because they are starting both from the pit lane. Stewards clearly unable to decide whose fault it was, their collision on lap 1 of the first race, and therefore deciding that both of them should start from the pits. Well, Nicola Lorini's got a fair few cars ahead of him. Starts on the dry line on the left-hand side of the racetrack, the right of the pictures we look at it, way back there. 3 from the end of the grid on that right-hand file as you're looking at it. The black Opel Vectra, Heinrich Szymanczyk, the multicolour BMW Paolo Zadra, they are the front row men. Then Romano Bernardini in the number 3 Nordauto Alfa, and Sergio Sambatore, the other red car on the second line, creeping away very slowly indeed, are the front row men. But look how quickly the Audis have gone, and look also how quickly the Nordauto Alfas have got their power down. It is Szymanczyk that leads, but Zadra has been blown away by the rest of the field. The BMW 5th into the first turn, and problems behind. Off goes one of the Audis and another of the Opel Vectras. But it is the Audi that leads, and that will be Roberto Toccacello, I would think. No, it can't be Enrico Toccacello even, because he's in an Alfa Romeo. But let's concentrate on what's going on further back, because Nicola Lorini we just saw, and there Fabrizio Giovanardi, well, not as easy as Monza, not as hard as Monza rather. He said at the beginning of the race they are flying through the back markers. And you see coming out of the pits just in the corner of the shot the 2 pit lane starters, and there they are. Look at that, Tarquini has already got ahead of the Audi, but Lorini, how many cars ahead of him? Just 2. He is now in 3rd place, halfway round this first lap of 10. So the reverse grid leads to drama at the first corner, but not an awful lot else, I have to say. I think this is Paolo Zadra's BMW ahead of him.
It just shows the expertise of the drivers when they can set off that far back on the grid and make it through all those cars just in 1/2 lap of this 5-kilometre circuit. But no one's giving up here, everyone's fighting for their positions. And here we see Tarquini at the back and Colciaggio right behind him. So those 2 are going to follow each other through. I'm pretty sure that Gabriele will have been and had a word with Roberto Colciaggio and said, now look, we need to be sensible about this, we need to score some points, and we need to go through this grid rather than argue with each other on the early laps like they did in the first race. So I'm pretty sure once they get a lot further through towards the front, then they might run into each other again, but at this meantime I think they're working reasonably well together to try and get through the grid as far as possible.
on board with Colciaggio. You're right, there is the number 4 car just ahead of him. And he is going to follow the Honda. No question, in these conditions, he's not going to be as fast as the Honda. It is Sergio Sambatoro, his teammate, that leads. But the Alphas now go past the second place man, Paolo Zadra's BMW, down to 4th in one fell swoop, and Giovanardi puts the move in on Larini. Larini opened the door there, they're side by side, wheel to wheel. Pijoli leading? Well, I don't think so. Pijoli started far too back down the order. We'll have to see. Maybe it is, in fact, maybe it is Pijoli who leads, but certainly the Alphas, 2nd and 3rd, Larini just held on there. In fact, it is Pijoli's Audi. It may well have been Sambataro who got it wrong going into the first corner, who we saw was the one of the cars that had a little collision earlier on. But Romano Bernardoni in the number 3 Nord Auto Alpha, who was starting 3rd on the grid, has already been passed by Gabriele Tarquini. She was down in 10th or 11th place after the first corner kerfuffle. Quite how the Works Nord or the Nord Auto lead pair managed to get their way through all of that, I really don't know, but they had a great run to the inside and the gaps just opened up in front of them.
Larini here following the leader, changing up early, and he's really stuck behind him now. He's got a big problem in that he's going to try and get past and also try and keep Giovanardi behind him. So he's got that run down that straight down the inside, and Giovanardi will simply follow him through.
Well, the inside line there, nice and dry, David, wasn't it? So that gave them the grip. They've obviously got the speed in a straight line that Pijoli certainly doesn't have. But you're right, Nicola Larini's main enemy for the remaining 8 races in the championship is the guy who won last year's title and carries the number 1 plate. No question about that.
These two now will stretch their lead, I'm pretty sure. They've got to the front very quickly. They haven't even quite finished the second lap now. They're just at the end of the second lap, and they are through into 1st and 2nd place. So even starting all the way back on the 5th and 6th row of the grid, it's taken them less than the 2 laps to get through to the front. But I'm pretty sure they'll not ease up either of them, and they will battle together side by side all the way to the finish line.
Yeah, it's particularly important for Giovanardi to take a win here because he hasn't got the points that Larini has. And down in 6th and 7th position now, Fabrice Valfish and the number 4 car of his teammate, the man who was expected to be one of the championship front runners, Gabriele Tarquini. On pace, certainly Tarquini deserves to be there. On luck, not at all. Valfish in 6th, Tarquini in 7th. It shouldn't take them long to dispose of Gianluca De Lorenzi, or indeed of Eric Querol, the Frenchman. They've already got rid of the rest of the field. Colciaggio still following along in Tarquini's wake, just Roberto Toccacello between them. Enrico Toccacello, I must stop calling him by his brother's name. Enrico Toccacello between them. Still Larini leading though, and it looks as though he's got the measure of Giovanardi, at least for the moment. Roberto Colciaggio in the Audi started from the pit lane with Gabriele Tarquini, and he is chasing the 2 Eurosport Hondas. Across the line it was Valfish ahead of Tarquini. Valfish took a little bit of passing by his teammate Gabriele Tarquini in the 2nd race at Monza. Tarquini then off the road in race 1 as well, but through a fault of his own. I think you'd have to say that this first race here was really a racing incident, and probably I think Gabriele would not refer to it as a fault of his own. Larini from Giovanardi out front and running away. And David, for all the pace of the Hondas in a straight line, there's not an awful lot to choose between them and the Alfa Romeos. But the Hondas, of course, have got an awful lot of passing to do. And at the moment, looks as though Giovanardi is content to sort of sit there behind Larini and not really get too rambustious.
I think what will happen at this early part of the race, they'll just sit there and drive away from the rest of them and not hold each other up. What they don't want to do is hold each other up, fighting all the time and letting Tarquini catch the pair of them. So they'll be very determined to just sit there and drive as fast as possible around the circuit to try and get that big gap on Tarquini so he doesn't get to them. Tarquini's still got the problem of starting out the pit lane, so he's a fair bit back, but carving through the field nonetheless, and that's him now up to 5th place there.
Just saw him put that comfortable move in on Eric Querol. Gianluca De Lorenzi passing Sergio Sambataro, the erstwhile leader, in the same moment. And he, Tarquini that is, as we saw there, moving up into 5th place. I think by the time we see him next, he will have got 4th away from Sambataro. He looked to be shaping up for that move. So there you can see, in fact, he's got past Gianluca De Lorenzi as well. He's up to 3rd place. Now, what about the gap? David, you've driven these Hondas. You know what a straight line machine they are, but how about compared to the Alphas? Do you think they've got the speed to be able to close down that gap?
Well, certainly at the last meeting at Monza, they had the speed to be able to do it, but here around a much more twisty circuit that we've got at Brno in Czechoslovakia, they're certainly finding it a lot harder. So while on the one dry session they had earlier in the weekend, Gabriele again was quickest out of everyone here, including the 2 Alphas. He now has quite a bit of a gap behind to be able to try and catch the 2 leading cars up front. So I think he'll have his work cut out. And in a very short race we've got, a 10-lap race, there's something like 4 laps gone now, so he's going to struggle to get all the way up to the leaders. He may close the gap a little bit, but I can't see him getting right to the front of the grid.
Even more important then, when they come across the line, the leaders will find out that Tarquini is right behind them as Colciaggio dives inside Fabrice Valfish. Even more important for the 2 Alpha drivers not to squabble amongst themselves, because that is the one thing that will close the gap quicker than anything, is if they start diving down the inside of each other, outbraking each other and slowing up their complete lap times, then it will allow Tarquini on clear road to get closer. Eric Carroll producing a storming drive here. The Frenchman in his BMW holding off Roberto Colciaggio, and here I think we've got pretty much an even battle. Colciaggio may just get him on top end speed and then perhaps on braking, because he can go down that inside line that Carroll can't use, and he does so, goes deep to the apex. But the Frenchman, very experienced indeed in Super Touring and Super Tourism racing, with more powerful cars than these in the French Championships, and does a good job at holding off Colciaggio. Now got Valfish right there, but as you can see, Gianluca De Lorenzi in 4th place on his own, ahead of this 4-way battle now. Great stuff as they fan out across the circuit behind Colciaggio. Gabriele Tarquini, the point I was going to make, has cleared off. And Fabrice Valfish there being elbowed rather curmudgeonly aside by the Nissan.
That's Sardelli. He went off in the first lap of the first race, and again starting right at the very back. So he's trying to work his way through. We don't know what happened to him. I just caught a glimpse as he went into the first corner. He looked as though he made a mistake, locked it up and was going straight on and probably into somebody else at the same time. But he's now trying to get himself through as well. But Colciaggio's through there, so he's up into 4th place. And we were left with the battle right behind him, which was raging between those 3 cars.
On board with our leader then. Oh, doesn't get to the apex, and why is that? Is there somebody inside him? His mirror won't show us that, but maybe we'll see the nose of the Alpha. No, it looks as though he just didn't quite get to the apex there, because he was compromising the first corner in that sequence for a good run through the rest of them. Larini still leads. Fabrizio Giovanardi in 2nd place. And look at the inclination changes here. This racetrack really does rise and fall. It doesn't show so well when you're looking at the cars, but from the onboards, particularly on the long shots, you can really see the elevation changes. A very scenic circuit. Puts me in mind a little bit of Oulton Park in Great Britain, places like that which have got a lot of elevation changes and a lot of different corners thrown together. Really challenging for the drivers. There is Tarquini using all of the curbing as he comes onto the pit straight, trying desperately to close down this lead pair. But Larini has got breathing space over Giovanardi. I wonder if Giovanardi will just sit there and save it all for the final lap if he's going to make a move at all.
And normally they sit right behind each other. Very, very close quarters. That's not happening at the moment. Giovanardi's being dropped just that little bit. We can see the time there. 1,000th of a second away from 1 whole second. So I would think Larini is actually able to pull away on his own there. Maybe he's got to drop Giovanardi down far enough, then there's a possibility Tarquini could catch up and end up second in this race, but he's got a lot of work to do before he gets anywhere near that position.
So Nicola Larini leads by a second from his teammate Fabrizio Giovanardi. Tarquini in 3rd place, and the race is all about these through. We're midway through it. Join us in a moment as we pick up the action. Welcome back to Brno. We are in the middle of the 2nd race of the Euro Super Touring, and it's being led by the Alfa Romeo pair, Nicola Larini and Fabrizio Giovanardi, in the order in which they finished the first race. And if Larini can win this one, that'll be 3 wins from 4 starts and a 2nd place ahead of his teammate in the championship points, and way ahead of Gabriele Tarquini, the man that the Nord Auto team really thought was going to be their main rival. We're on board with Roberto Colciaggio, who, like Tarquini, started from the pit lane as a result of their first lap accident in the first race, and he is working around the back of Gianluca Di Lorenzi. Di Lorenzi's BMW, the car right in front of him, holding on.
You can see there the indicator flashing. De Lorenzi knows that Colciaggio is just that much quicker than what he is, and he stayed on the left-hand side of the circuit, put the indicator on and let him past. It's no good trying to fight and the two of them falling off. You've got to get to the end of this race to score points, and he's using his head at that point and deciding that it's easy to let the guy pass and follow him and lose as little time as possible, rather than fight with the guy and lose even more time and maybe be caught by the pack behind. Because remember, in that pack behind, you've got Wallfish with a Honda, and you've got Sardini with a Nissan, and those two, I'm sure, are looking to try and take the place away from Di Lorenzi in front there.
They'll be very happy indeed to do that, no doubt about it. And Gianluca Di Lorenzi also running for the amateurs points here. So there's a slightly different script for him, really. As long as he can stay up front, he will do, but concentrating more on the separate battle that he's involved in with the other drivers in the field compared to these top-line guys out front. Well, no sign of the foul weather returning, although very black clouds still lurking in the background. A couple of patches of blue there as well as we look through the pit box there of the Nord Auto team. Yellow flags once more at this sequence. And this is a familiar place for cars to go off. Somebody's gone off down there, but the director hasn't seen fit to worry us too much with who it was. At least we know it's neither of the Alphas, and we also assume it's not Gabriele Tarquini, because we would hope that he would have considered that to have been an important omission from the order. 4 laps to go. You mentioned, David, that these two are normally absolutely glued together. Well, Giovanardi seems to have got himself velcroed back onto the back of Nicola Larini's car, and they are working as one. Does that mean that as they cross the line with 3 to go, Giovanardi is now starting to think about the end of the race rather than worry about the man who just comes on to finish straight, Gabriele Tarquini in third?
I think so. He was sitting there behind at the beginning of the race, and he wasn't going to make any moves. There's no point in fighting amongst themselves, as we said earlier. Realised that Tarquini is so far behind, there's no way in the world he's going to catch them during this race unless they do something very, very silly. So Giovanardi is going to sit there, and I can see him just waiting to pounce at the last lap of the race. He'll watch and see exactly what Larini does through all the corners. He'll be weighing it up, and he hasn't waited till the end of the race. He's gone through already.
Well, so, while the director was watching Sergio Sambatore throwing his Audi around, the Alphas have swapped positions. And Giovanardi not wasting any time about it either. Maybe he just sat back there a second in arrears and had a look at Larini and maybe tried a couple of things independently of what Larini was doing, without therefore showing his hand to his teammate, and then closed right up behind him and immediately made a move. Now the question remains as to whether that will stick, or whether Larini, as we've seen him do twice so far in 3 starts, will come back at him and retake the lead to win the race. Oh, Larini drops it! Dear oh dear.
He was trying hard there, very, very hard indeed. I think he realised that when Giovanardi was obviously quicker, we see him drop to a second behind and then come back right onto his boot lid. So Giovanardi made the right move there in the end. He obviously felt that he was that much faster and he could actually pull away from his teammate, and his teammate was just trying so hard to hang on to the back of him. He dropped it clean off the circuit, and here we're going to see it again. I think pretty shortly it'll come round this corner, and here we go. Off, just ran out of grip, off across the curb, across that little bit of gravel trap was there, and down the grass. But back onto the circuit, so he will continue to score lots of points. So while he still has a 15-point lead in the championship at the moment, he's going to lose 5 of those points, so he'll end up at the end of this race still leading the championship. He won't be too worried about that. As he said earlier on, it's a very long championship. There's lots of rounds to go. There's 2 rounds at every meeting, so lots of points to be had for the future. I noticed he still had his headlights on. Now I know you need your headlights to get past as you're coming through the field, but once you're through the field, then you need to switch those headlights off, because lights take energy, and energy is generated by the alternator, and something has to drive the alternator. That's the engine, and that's using power. So if they can use their brains a little bit more, switch the lights off and try and get the best out of the car as possible.
Well, Larini really revelling in the handling of this Alfa in these dry conditions now, really throwing the car around. So too is his teammate Fabrizio Giovanardi, the race leader, really leaning on their tyres, probably for the first time all weekend. Inside the final lap and a half of the second Euro STC race at Brno, Fabrizio Giovanardi is our race leader. Took the lead very quickly indeed from Nicola Larini. Larini then chasing him hard. Half a lap later put the car momentarily off onto the grass as he ran wide, and a tight right-hander bounced across the gravel onto the grass, back on again without losing much momentum or really much distance either to the third place man. Gabriele Tarquini is still in third in the Honda, but you can see 6 seconds and nearly 7 behind Larini. Larini dropping away from Giovanardi, and it clearly is the case, I would suggest, that Larini's car not handling as well as Giovanardi's, and he knows it. Therefore, 2 things: 1, don't go off, and 2, make sure you don't get caught and passed by Tarquini. I think the third possibility, which is pass Giovanardi and win this one, has already been scratched off his little mental list of to-do things for the afternoon.
Yeah, it's the first time on the basis he gets to the finish we don't say something we shouldn't do. It would be the first time he's beaten Larini this year. Larini has always managed to finish in front, even on the second race at Monza where Gabriele was first, Larini was second and Giovanardi third. So this will be a good little feather in the cap for Giovanardi, making a point that, you know, he's still in there, he wants to win the championship and he's not going to let his teammate have it all his own way. But back in the positions, we've got De Lorenzi and Sardelli fighting further down the field. Now they're fighting for their junior positions. Both of those are the junior drivers, and they're only 1 second apart at the moment. So Sardini managed to win at the first race at Monza that position, so we'll see what happens in this race.
Well, those two very evenly matched, the Audi and the BMW, and they are having a good scrap. These two pretty evenly matched as well. We saw Giovanardi making chassis changes to his car in qualifying, and Larini doing a slightly better job of that to head the field up. But it looks as though the chassis engineering on the #1 car has been superior for the conditions we have just at the moment here at Brno, and that's very much a given at Brno, that no matter what you do, you tend to run a little bit with luck as to whether it works for the prevailing conditions of the time, because nothing has remained constant here apart from the inconsistency of the weather. But Giovanardi has got the best car on the track at the moment. Larini in second place. Tarquini is still edging gradually closer, but it's tenths rather than seconds that he is gaining, and he needs it to be the other way round to stand any chance of upsetting this Alfa 1-2. And Larini with victory in second place. David, as you said, at Monza, victory in second place here at Brno. If he can keep that going throughout the rest of the championship, then that is pretty much going to guarantee him a strong championship challenge all the way to the final round.
Yeah, these two certainly look as though they're going to be the contenders for the championship. They know on their fears were definitely that Tarquini would give them a hard time. Tarquini's managed to make life very difficult for himself by not finishing the first race at Monza and not finishing the first race here at Brno. That's done him no good at all, and to come from that many points behind, although there's a lot of races, he really has an uphill struggle now to get there.
Delight for Giovanardi particularly, and for the Nord Auto Alfa team. Their third 1-2 finish in 4 starts in the Super Racing weekends in the Super Touring category. And Gabriele Tarquini now with a first and a third place and 2 DNFs. That is not what makes a champion. He needs to have a significant improvement of fortunes, and more importantly, needs for things to start going wrong with both the Nord Auto Alfas. Giovanardi at the beginning of the first race was saying, hey guys, I'm on pole position, remember me? I was the Euro STC champion as recently as last year. All this Larini-Tarquini stuff was starting to get him down a little, and I think this is a personal statement as much as anything else from Giovanardi. Hey, don't you forget about me, in the very famous words of somebody or other. So Giovanardi wins from Nicola Larini, but that still leaves Larini as the championship leader from his teammates. The margin, though, has been slightly reduced, and the points gap between them In fact, with a win apiece and the second place apiece, should be exactly the same as it was leaving Monza. So Larini eased ahead after race 3, and Tarquini pulled him back a little bit after race 4. And with a pair of races for the remaining 8 races, still 16 races to go for these guys to sort it all out. So another good job by the Nord Auto Alfa Romeo team. Another good job as well by the Eurosport Honda team. 2 inexplicable engine blow-ups for Fabrice Valfish hindered his learning progress this weekend, as well as the dreadful weather. Gabriele Tarquini, another first race incident that put him out of the running and out of the points. And he can ill afford any more of those. He needs a clean slate of finishes, and they need to be first or second places. Otherwise, he may as well give up and go home, because on the current rate of gaining points, he's going to be embarrassingly down the order. Well, the next Super Racing weekend, of course, is at Magny-Cours. We've still got more action to show you here from Brno, but Magny-Cours, the French Grand Prix venue, may well be a very different kettle of fish for the Honda. That is another high-speed track, and Tarquini should hopefully fare a little better there, hopefully at least for him. Well, there's the results. Di Lorenzi and Sardelli 4th and 5th. And Roberto Colciaggio down there in 9th position behind his teammate Massimo Poggioli. Couldn't get past him in the end, finishing down there in 9th. Well, the Eurosport commentators' transport has finally arrived at Brno. Yes, I am joking. That's my personal helicopter. So the Euro STC then, with the Alphas looking stronger and stronger. And David, difficult times now, really, for Gabriele Tarquini. One definitely his fault, one arguably not his fault, but still the result is the same. He's only scored in half the races so far, and a lot of the amateur drivers are ahead of him, never mind his arch-championship rivals in the Alphas.
Yes, it's not good for him. He made his own mistake at Monza and hit the wall there very hard. And I've got to say, the accident in the first race here today was a bit of a 50-50 thing. They had a bit of a coming together to start with, and then they parted, but in the next corner they decided to try and run into each other. And this is something that touring car drivers are very bad for. Once somebody gives them a bit of a tap, they feel that they want to give them a bit of a tap back. And that really has spoiled his championship chances. And Roberto, unfortunately, I know to my experience, is very good at running into people. At the end of last season, I managed to do a race with him, and he managed to run me off the circuit in a much more harder way than what we've seen today. But it doesn't matter how hard it is. Once you're off, you're off. You're not scoring any points whatsoever.
Understandable, but avoidable, I think, will be our answer to that incident.
Fabrizio, that was the 4th race of the season. It was your first win. How do you feel?
I feel good, because before I said yes, I will win, it was impossible. I was not able, because the other drivers are really faster, and also in this race it was hard to overtake my teammate. This year is very good, but it's a long way.
And it was a great result, a great weekend for the Alfa Romeo team.
Yes, I think so, but must look the Honda, because yes, he did 2 mistakes in 2 races, but I think will be dangerous in the other circuit.
Well done, Fabrizio. Thank you.
Yes, they're certainly not going to rest on their laurels, are they? Fabrizio Giovanardi knows what a tough cookie Gabriele Tarquini can be. Understandable incident perhaps, but definitely avoidable. I would have said that first lap clash. He wanted to make up places as quickly as he could here, and just overstepped the mark a little bit in his anxiety to stay in touch with the Alphas. So Giovanardi happy with that first win, just to remind everybody that he's still as quick as he was at the end of last season. I don't think Nicola Larini will be particularly worried about finishing in second place. He certainly backed off towards the end and let Giovanardi go. And one of the signs of a good racing driver is to race only within the limits of your car.
Nicola, second place. Well done. That was a good battle that you were having with your teammate Fabrizio.
Yeah, I had a good car at the beginning, but I have misfiring problems after the 5th lap, so it was impossible to contain my teammate. There was not any more engine in the uphill and in the fast in the straight line. So I tried for 2 laps, but he was so quicker than me in acceleration that it was impossible to maintain position.
And it looked as though at one point when you went off the track that you might crash. Were you close to crashing then?
When I'm following Giovanardi, no, just there was my firing problem. I lost the control of the car because he cut the engine a lot, and I lost the car for few cents, but it's okay.
First and second today. Well done, Nicola.
Thank you very much. Yeah, like Monza, I want to continue like this.
Thank you.
So there's the answer, David, to why Giovanardi suddenly went from a second back to right up his exhaust pipe, because the Alfa developed a misfire and the engine cut, dropping him off the track there. And as I said, driving to exactly what your car will do, and clearly it would do no more for him. And once he lost the lead, he just concentrated on getting it home with as many points as he possibly could. So, sensible racing from Nicola Larini, but you do sense that this is a no-holds-barred contest between Giovanardi and Larini in the 2 Alphas, with a weather eye on what Tarquini is doing. And I have to say, if they have an unavoidable accident that takes them both out, I will be most surprised. So that's it for the Super Touring. The Alfa drivers still leading after another disappointing weekend for Tarquini. Stay with us though. After the break we will bring you the action from the Euro Super Production race here and from the qualifying session. More to come on the Super Racing weekend from Brno. Stay with us here on Eurosport. Back at Brno, let's take a look now at the qualifying for the Super Production cars. This second tin-top formula, part of the 4-pronged assault that is the Super Racing weekend. Well, Peter Cox of the Netherlands in the new Roberto Ravaglia run BMW Motorsport Team Italia car in wet conditions. Well, rain and snow, sleet, slush, whatever you like to call it, falling from the skies during practice. He was fastest in free practice. In both sessions, in fact, he was quickest and went on to claim pole position. Gianni Morbidelli sick for a couple of days, and that debilitating him during qualifying. He only managed 5th fastest time in the number 5 CBME BMW. Morbidelli 2.2 seconds off the pace in qualifying. Tommy Rustad started well in practice, but as the others picked up pace, he didn't seem to. He ended up in 10th spot, 4.6 seconds off the pace, and clearly neither conditions nor the Nissan suiting the track very well. Toby Massini, who we saw running in last year's British Production Saloon Championship, the National Saloon Cup, was in 8th fastest time, the fastest of the Alfa 156s. Tom Ferrier was an Alfa driver last year, whereas Tabia was in a Honda Integra R. Tom Ferrier in a BMW this weekend. And Ferrier in 6th position, the best of the 2 Brits in this Edenbridge Racing Run 2-strong team. Pegan Anderson featured strongly in his BMW in the Monza race, and the Swede qualified 4th fastest, but he was 1.8 seconds away from pole. And we've seen a big discrepancy in times in this Super Production qualifying in Brno, and that largely because of the really changeable weather throughout practice and the dead cold conditions in qualifying. Didn't really give anybody much of a chance. You can see snow falling during qualifying while Pegan Anderson was out there. Stefano Gabellini, the number 6 machine, 3rd fastest in his CBME BMW. His time 1.7 seconds away from pole. And he might possibly have got a little quicker had he not made a small error and curtailed his qualifying. Well, it's understandable, I suppose. You don't too often have to qualify in the snow. Now, Norman Seaman on the second row of the grid at Monza, the number 2 Revalia run BMW. But Seaman going one row quicker this time and improving by 3 grid positions to go second fastest. But even Norman Seaman couldn't hold a candle to Peter Cox, 1.2 seconds away from pole. And don't forget, this is the man who is second on the grid. Former single-seater race, of course. Turned only to touring cars for the first time at Monza. So Cox with plenty of experience, front and rear-wheel drive cars, but particularly in the touring class. And so Norman Seaman really trying to learn as well as race. Peter Cox, well, fastest of all of them. His time 2:18.761, his fastest lap of the weekend by 0.2 of a second. Previous fastest in practice 2:18.9. The closest anybody else had got was in the 19s, and that was very much the case for qualifying, except that nobody else even managed to break into the 19s. Norman Seaman, 2:20.038, was the closest of the other rivals. That means that Peter Cox, the poleman and winner, runaway winner in Monza, looking very strong indeed for a second win. Clearly the snow not bothering the Dutchman that much. So there you have the qualifying results for the Super Productions. Stefano Gabellini third, despite dropping the car into the gravel. Could have improved perhaps to take second away from Norman Seaman and break up the Revalia run car's domination of the front row. Pegan Anderson fourth from Gianni Morbidelli in the second of the CBME cars. And Tom Ferrier, the best of the Edenbridge cars, in sixth. His teammate James Hansen, 6 places further back in 12th position. But let's hear from our poleman, Peter Cox.
Peter Cox, congratulations, you're on pole position. You're 1.25 seconds quicker than anybody else. Does that surprise you?
Yeah, to be honest, yes. Because I think, okay, the track circumstances are not ideal with the snow a little bit, but on the other hand, it's the same for everybody. But I'm really happy because it's still a very young team, Revalia Motorsport, and I think we played the elements really well. And so it's nothing more we can wish for. We have a complete front row, first and second, so I think we should be very, very happy, and we're looking strong for the race.
Looking very strong indeed for the race. The fastest cars at Monza, once more fastest at Brno. Welcome back live to Brno for the second Eurosport Super Racing Weekend. This is our final race, the Euro Super Production class, and it's Peter Cox and Norman Seaman in the 2 Roberto Revalia run BMW Motorsport Italia cars that are on the front row of the grid. Stefano Gabellini in third place and Pegan Anderson in fourth. More BMWs, and in fact the BMWs ruling in qualifying all the way down to 8th place, where you find Tabea Massini in the first of the Alfa Romeos. Well, it's definitely the car to have, this BMW. David Leslie, it didn't win last year's German Super Group N Championship. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's hear first, though, from Gianni Morbidelli.
You told me yesterday that you've had a bad cold for a few days. Are you feeling better now?
Yeah, physically I'm okay. Unfortunately, this is not a good position for make a good race, but I will attach. Today I want to be aggressive. The only thing that I can do is try to push harder from the beginning until the end.
It's a lot drier today than it was yesterday. Is that good for you?
Okay, stop.
Thank you, Gianni.
Should hopefully be better for everybody, David. This produced a cracking race at Monza, the Super Production class. Although the 2 BMWs, and particularly Peter Cox, I think is likely to clear off, hopefully we should get a good scrap in the remaining top half dozen places.
Yeah, it was really good at Monza. These cars are all very close together. As you see in the front, the majority of BMWs at this moment in time. Although they didn't win their national championship last year in Germany, they have taken the new rules that they have for this year for the European Super Production class, and they've built the car especially for that. And they were the first people to get the car out onto the circuit. Now that's been shown on the first couple of races because they've been right up front. The last race at Monza, the Nissan Primera was the next car up behind them, but since then the Alfa Romeos have moved forward, and we've got both the Massini and the Villamil Alphas in front of Tommy Rustad with his Nissan Primera. So the other manufacturers making headway at this moment in time, but still for the beginning of the season we can see all these 6 BMWs, 7 BMWs up front here making life all their own.
Well, two new cars to talk about. Right at the back of the grid, unfortunately, Fulvio Cavici has joined Ettore Bonaldi in a second of the brand new shape Alfa 147s, those two being run by the Conrero Motorsport team, and Lithuanian driver Egidijus Dapsas on the back of the grid. He will start in last place in a Honda Integra R. Now, those cars, of course, familiar to British viewers of the British Super no, I don't mean Super anything, I mean National Saloon Car Cup, and the first one of those running here in Super Production, very much to the same sort of rules. And you can see James Hansen there in car number 10 on 12th spot on the grid alongside the Belgian, and the two Conrero 147s. There's pretty little new Alfa, newer and less developed than the 156, but the shape of the future. And on the final row of the grid, Paolo Ruberti, the ex-Formula 3000 driver, in his BMW, and alongside him our new entry, the Lithuanian Egidijus Dapsas, in his Honda Integra R. So as they continue round the warm-up lap, what we saw at the end of the Super Touring second race, the dark grey clouds and the sort of gloomy nature of the track, well, that seems to have been blowing by, because once more we've got sun shining down on Brno, and that will be good for the racing, but not particularly good for anybody trying to catch Peter Cox, I don't think. He was quick in the snow, quick in the rain, and at Monza he proved that he could be quick in the dry as well. And David, I rather fear that we're going to see him disappear in much the same way as he did in Monza, because I rather think that Norman Seaman, in only his second touring car race, is going to have his hands full from behind.
I think he is. All these cars are queuing up behind them to try and get into that place and try and split up this pair of Rivalia cars. But certainly even in the warm-up this morning, Peter Cox was quickest again by some 7/10 of a second, but this time from Duncan Heisman and Gianni Morbidelli, who we spoke to earlier, in third. What was really good about this morning was in fourth place was Tom Ferrier in the British entry in one of the BMWs. So he's been improving tremendously. I know when they were at Monza they were saying they didn't have the latest developments on the engine, etc. Those look as though they've arrived now, so they've certainly moved up the field a bit. Starting sixth on the grid, although fourth this morning, so he'll be looking forward for a really good race. He was the first of the under 25 people in warm-up this morning, although second in the actual qualifying for the race.
Cars coming to the line ready for round two of the European Super Production Championship, headed by Peter Cox and Norman Seaman from Team Rivalia Motorsport, the two BMW 320i's, the new E46 shaped car, unlike the older car that we've seen running in Super Touring. 9 degrees of air temperature now, a balmy 16 degrees of track temperature, up 12 from the start of the GT race, and that's greatly thanks to some presence of some sunshine. It looks as though we may get a dry final race here in this second Eurosport Super Racing weekend. Well, Cox and Seaman, and then Stefano Gabellini, Pegan Anderson, Gianni Morbidelli, Tom Ferrier, Duncan Heisman, 7 BMWs ahead of the first of the Alphas, that's Tobia Massini. The red lights waiting to come on. And a long hold for the green, away they go. Good start from third spot by Stefano Gabellini. The CBME car gets ahead of Norman Seaman. He's looking for the inside line to try and take the advantage from Peter Cox. Cox did not get away well, nor did Seaman. Gabellini absolutely electrifying off the grid though, and Duncan Heisman coming through into fourth place, trying to get inside as well. No, in fact, there was Pegan Anderson, but Duncan Heisman's gone around Gianni Morbidelli. Morbidelli did not get away well either. So, oh dear, now what happened there? Because Peter Cox did not have the lead coming into the first corner, but he certainly got it on the way out. There's bumpers going off further back, and that is Gianni Morbidelli and his CBME teammate colliding in the middle of the field. The accident started further back. Is that Duncan Heisman's car? I think it is. Well, that is a big collision in the midfield, and that will certainly hand the race to Peter Cox and Norman Seaman, and whoever got away with them, and I think that's Pegan Anderson, the man who led into the first turn. Anderson, I think, probably getting in too hot, David, and then running wide, and that allowed Cox and Seaman to come back by him.
Yeah, certainly something happened there. We could see just before the accident there was some bits going. There we are, we can see one of the CBME cars turn. That's the two CBME black and orange cars together. Going off to the left we could see Tom Ferrier, so that was very disappointing for a great qualifying, so he's gone off as well. 4 cars taken out of this race already, and that will certainly help the Alfa Romeos and Nissans further back to score some more points in this race.
In fact, it is Duncan Heisman in 3rd place. Couldn't make out which of those 2 cars it was. It is Heisman, the 14 car, in 3rd place. His teammate, I think, in 4th place is Pagan Anderson. But Duncan Heisman now determined not to let fellow Dutchman Peter Cox get away. He's trying to work on Norman Seaman to take that 2nd place. Also saw Tommy Rustad getting door-to-door with either Toby Massini or Lewis Villamil in their Alpha in the foreground as we were watching the replay there. So there was lots of colliding going on. Another splitter goes, and that is the nose of Duncan Heisman's car without its little aerodynamic device, and that's what we saw originally flying up in the air as somebody ran into the back of somebody else. Cox leads, Seaman 2nd, Heisman in 3rd place, Rustad in 4th. One of the and Rustad's had a collision from behind. The CBME car number 7, that's Paolo Ruberti, who was on the last row of the grid. Blimey, Charlie, that was some start from him. Paolo Ruberti in 5th place. Well, all right, let's let Peter Cox go. Let's leave the battle for 2nd place. Let's get back and join the melee that is the midfield, because that's where the excitement is at the moment. Peter Cox is going to romp away with this one. Norman Seaman and Duncan Heisman in 2nd and 3rd. Heisman without that tiny little trim piece that's come off the front of the car. Rustad 4th, Ruberti it is in 5th. Toby Massini it was then, who was inside Tommy Rustad on the first lap when they had their little door banging just ahead of the accident, having escaped that big collision. But the CBME cars, 5 and 6, both out on the spot. Gianni Morbidelli and the man who started ahead of him on the grid, Stefano Gabellini, they were 3rd and 5th respectively. So here comes Rustad, then it's the Alpha twins, Massini and Lewis Villamil behind him. So what on earth has happened then to Paolo Ruberti's BMW? Didn't see him in that shot. Like grease lightning up in there and then like grease lightning back out again.
This race is just changing so fast at the moment. Here we are looking for the 2nd place position, and this is where the race is going to be all race long. They're just so close here between the 2 of them. Norman Seaman still managing to hold off, but having to take a defensive line as they're coming down here and not sticking to what he should be. But it's so close to these cars, there's very, very little in them. Now, will he take a dive up the inside? There he goes.
He did. Oh, Heisman inching alongside all the way in the manner of 2 lorries on the motorway, one doing 69 miles an hour and the other doing 70. He gradually crept alongside until he was a 1/3 of the way down as they got to the braking area. Seaman couldn't defend there, but he comes back at him. This tight little sequence is great for these cars because it does allow the driver defending on the outside line of one corner to then be lining up on the inside line of the next. And again, Heisman makes the move for 2nd place. And again, he was on the advantage coming through the previous corner and the disadvantage coming into that one. So Cox comes along well in the lead. Seaman in 2nd place. Heisman tucked right there, and David trying to pick up those few extra revs. Roberto Ravaglia watching from the pit wall.
You can see him slipstreaming all the way along the straight. That's what we want to do. We want to be right in behind him to try and get that toe along the straight. In the very last minute, pull out and try and dive up the inside. It didn't quite work for him. We've seen him pull out, but he wasn't able to brake late enough. Norman Seaman was just that little bit good on the brakes, and he was able to hold that position into that first corner after start and finish straight.
Well, Seaman still has it. Heisman in 3rd place. Tommy Rustad still in 4th position. But what's going on further back? That's what we want to know, because there is plenty of racing from 4th down to 10th place. They're all very close indeed. The replay didn't really show us what triggered off that accident, David, but essentially they look to be 4 or 5 wide, everybody leaning on everybody else on the first lap, as you might expect.
I think it's that first lap when everybody's out there together. They're all trying to get their little inch forward to try and make up a couple of places, and someone just tried a little bit too hard, leaned on somebody, and once one started to spin across in front of the other one, it just simply involved another 2 cars in there somewhere. Now we know it's got rid of 2 of the CBME cars. Stefano Gabellini and Gianni Morbidelli, and also the Per Gunnar Andersen cars disappeared. So what are we left with now? We're left with...
well, that means probably that Tom Ferrier must have rejoined, because he hasn't been shown as a retirement, so he'll be right at the back and behind his teammate James Hansen. But as we saw there, Heisman got ahead, Seaman fought back, but Heisman now in second and holding on there. So Duncan Heisman in second place, chasing Peter Cox and leaving Norman Seaman behind. They had a very close battle for 2.5 laps there for second place. But David, I thought very fair indeed, considering that neither of them are exactly the world's most experienced touring car driver.
I think that could be to their favour, in actual fact. They're used to racing and racing cleanly. Unfortunately, we've seen so many times in touring car racing, saloon car racing, that they don't always race as clean as you should. We've seen it in the race previous with Gabrielli and Roberto Colgialdo. They just ran into each other, and these guys didn't do that. These guys have got their heads screwed on. They're fighting very hard, they're trying their best, but they know that to score points you need to get to the finish, and they're racing really cleanly. They're trying everything they can, they're diving down the inside of each other, and they're putting all the effort into it that they can, but without knocking each other off.
Strange situation again. We saw Roberto Ravaglia there on the pit wall, for a former touring car world champion, and to be in the team owner's situation. Now that's something you've done as a racing driver, to be running a team of young drivers. How does it feel when you're on the pit wall? Do you think, ooh, I wouldn't be doing that if I was him, or do you just have to let them get on with it?
You have to let them go on with it, but unfortunately you do stand on the pit wall thinking, oh, I wouldn't do it that way, I'll do it different, or I could do better, or whatever. And I found it much harder to be standing on the pit wall watching my guys race my cars than I did to actually be out there racing myself. So I can see Roberto Ravaglia standing there thinking exactly the same thing. He's got one car in first, one car in third, thinking, well, why haven't I got first and second? Because he was first and second. So he'll be jumping up and down. If only could get hold of the driver and tell him, try this a little bit different, try a little bit different there, in order to get back into second place. But yes, very much harder, I found it, standing on the pit wall.
Well, Duncan Heisman is in second spot then. Norman Seaman, for those of you who haven't come across him before, essentially a single-seater man, raced in the German Formula 3 Championship last year, having moved up from Formula Vauxhall. So also did a couple of races in the European Le Mans Series, notably faring very well in the pole team's car at the very wet Nürburgring track. Here we're looking at 4th, 5th and 6th. Tommy Rustad in the Nissan in 4th place. And then the two Alphas, Tabea Massini and Luis Villamil, the Italian and the Spaniard, in 5th and 6th position. But all of those really slightly hamstrung by not having a BMW. And I don't think there'll be too many races this season where we'll see 2/3 of the CBME team and another one of the lead BMWs knocked out in the first lap. So those guys, well, the Nissan short of finance as well as development at the moment. The BMW is certainly the best developed car out there. It seems to me, though, that Peter Cox has probably just pegged his speed now. He's not escaping anymore, but he's not being reeled in particularly. I think he's just comfortably reeling off the laps now.
Yeah, I think because he was so much quicker when he was out there in practice and again this morning in warm-up. He knows exactly what he can do, and he can just simply go out there and set a nice comfortable speed. He's got a good lead out there at the moment. He doesn't need to push the car. The more you push the car, the harder you try, the more chances are of breaking the car. So he's out there just doing a nice controlled race. He's controlling the race from the front. He's where he wants to be basically, and he can just sit there and keep a nice steady gap between him and second place. So we should have a quick inside shot there from Tommy Rustad's Nissan. This car, as you said before, very much lacking in development and also lacking in money to be able to run it. But it's out there, it's going well. Certainly in qualifying it was some 4.6 seconds off pole position. But as we can see during the race here, they've obviously found something in the car and made it an awful lot better, because it's suddenly an awful lot better, and it's up there in 4th place now, and it's not being dropped at the rate of 4 seconds a lap like it had been when it was in qualifying. So whatever they've done between qualifying and the race has obviously helped them tremendously. It was behind the two Alfa Romeos in qualifying, and now it's ahead of them. So Tabea Massini in Louis Villemil, I'm sure, will be kicking themselves for ending up slightly further down. They could have been 4th and 5th, but unfortunately at this moment in time, they're 5th and 6th.
Well, could it be something as simple as the fact that they really haven't got a good wet setup? Because as we saw, it was snowing lightly and the track was very slippery in qualifying. And if they've really only done dry racing and dry testing with that Nissan, then they just may have got a bit lost in the greasier conditions.
I'm sure these guys further back are definitely down on testing time, not just dry weather or wet weather. They're down full stop. The BMW was well sorted before it came out at the beginning of the season. BMW had put that car together and built it. They went out and they did the testing work. They developed it and then they sold it on to the various teams from the different countries. Because as we've seen so far, we've got teams from Germany and Italy and Holland out there. So BMW are doing it right because they're giving the cars to the different countries in order for the countries to go out and race them. So BMW are taking no part in being a manufacturer out there, but they are supplying the equipment for the various teams to be able to go out and do the job. And they've certainly done an excellent job having the top 7 places on the grid, although 4 of them managed to get rid of themselves during the first lap, yes, which made life extremely exciting at that point, but nevertheless
doing a good job with the various different teams that are running them. 3 different teams in the first 3 rows of the grid with their BMWs. So Peter Cox leading comfortably then, the race drawing towards its conclusion. Stay with us as we return live after this break. Eurosport live at Brno, the second race of the European Super Production Championship, the second Super Racing weekend. And this is the man who currently lies in 3rd place, Norman Seaman. Peter Cox leads from Duncan Heisman in 2nd place. BMWs 1, 2 and 3. Tommy Rustad 4th in his Nissan. And incidentally, we did wonder what suddenly happened to Paolo Ruberti. We saw just a flash of him in the pits earlier on as we were going on board with Tommy Rustad in 4th place. Ruberti had come from the last row of the grid up into 4th place, and then just as quickly as he got there, disappeared. And we've heard from the pits that in fact he ran into brake problems. And whether that was because he'd had a quick excursion into the gravel and picked up a stone in the caliper, or whether the brake problems led to him dropping down the order, I'm not yet certain. 16 and 18 rather, Louis Villemil and Tabia Massini have now swapped places. Villemil was 6th, Massini 5th, and the 2 Alphas have reversed those positions, having a little class battle of Alpha 156s among themselves. David, this one has spread out a little bit more than I thought perhaps it might do, but really that was because of the major incident about a third of the way round lap 1, taking off part of the field and also leaving a big hole between the rest of them and the leaders.
Yes, that action happened right in the middle of the field there, and you can see when it started, it just suddenly encompassed so many cars in there, and it split up the grid tremendously because the leaders were out front and they just simply stretched their legs and went away. So you were left with this big gap behind the first 3. First 3 got away and the rest of them were all in there fighting. It was the people in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th that were involved in that incident. So we've got this big gap between the first 3 and the rest of the field. But the 2 Alfa Romeos, as we've seen there, they're out there giving each other a very hard battle. And racing is racing, and it doesn't matter whereabouts you are on the circuit, whether you're at the front or in the middle or anywhere near the back. The one thing you want to do is try and improve, and if it's only improving on the guy in front that you can see, then that's what you want to do. And the 2 little Alphas are out there, and we've had 1 change already, but I'm sure they'll fight all the way to the finish.
I don't doubt it, absolutely right. And we saw that very tough battle for the 2nd place man, Duncan Heisman, to get past Norman Seaman. He eventually made it, but not before they'd swapped the lead, or swapped 2nd place several times. On board with the 4th place man, Tommy Rustad. And of course the most noticeable difference between these cars and the Super Tourings is the gear lever. This is a normal road style gearbox. In fact, the rules demand that you use the gearbox casing from the road car in its normal position, and you can obviously have toughened gears built, which they all do, but they have to be in the same ratios as the road car has. You can then homologate another set if you like, if they're not suitable for racing, but you're not allowed to mix and match. You have to use one set or the other. Peter Cox in the BMW. Of course, compared to something like a Nissan Primera, the 3 Series BMW, top-of-the-range car, very much more a performance car to start with, and perhaps, therefore, with the addition of factory work, proving, as a result, to be a better racer. Don't doubt that in David Leslie's hands, a Nissan road car would give many competently driven 320i's a good seeing to, but we can't all be David Leslie in his Nissan experience. The Nissan in 4th place at the moment. I think Tommy Rustad's done a very respectable job with a late entry, limited budget, and certainly a car that's not as well developed as the BMWs, because, am I wrong, did he finish 4th in Monza? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was well up anyway.
Yes, he had a good result in Monza. And again, he was the first non-BMW to finish. But they've worked very hard with this little team. This little team, as we said before, very much underfunded at this moment in time, and very much a very late deal to come to the party here to go racing. He was supposed to be racing a Super Touring car in the Swedish Championship. He won the Swedish Championship last year with that car, and for whatever reasons, sponsorship reasons, whatever, suddenly that fell apart at the very last minute. So he's turned up here in this production-based version of the Nissan Primera, and doing a very good job indeed, because as we said earlier, he qualified very badly, but he's been able to pull it up. It helped tremendously that, as we said before, the 4 of them took each other out on that first lap. But take nothing away from him, when we were watching in-car camera before, he was trying very hard, and you could see when he got to the end of the straight and going around the first corner, the car was sliding all over the place. And remember, these are front-wheel drive cars in the Primera, and you can see the back of the car sliding. So when the back of the car slides like that, he doesn't have a great deal of control over it. All he can do is try and keep the foot flat to the board, and in doing that, that will try and pull the car forward and pull it out of the slide that he got himself into. So he's not taking it easy. He may be in 4th place, he may be a fair bit behind the BMWs in front of him, but he's trying very hard out there to make up whatever he can, and also pull away from these 2 battling Alfa Romeos behind him.
Well, talking of sliding front-wheel drive cars around, the second of these cars, Tabea Massini, in the Honda that he was racing in last year's National Saloon Cup. Anybody who went to any of the Power Tour meetings and watched him in action in his blue and white machine, they'll know that he was driving it like a 400 horsepower rear-wheel driven saloon, because he was throwing it around everywhere, tail sliding. And as David said, when you get into that situation in a rear-wheel drive car, burying your foot and steering the front wheels is all you can do. Keep the momentum going at the front end and hope that the tail end follows, which is what they generally tend to do. Of course, that's not the situation with the BMWs. They're rear drive cars, as they are in road format, and so much more of the conventional front to rear balance. And again, that's part of the problem potentially with a front wheel drive Super Tourer or Super Production car, is that the front wheels tend to end up trying to do everything, braking, steering and transmitting the power, and that tends to compromise one against the other. You can't do them both at the same time. With the BMW, you can steer and give it a big bootful at the same time, and the independent ends of the car will be doing their own jobs.
The problem with that, obviously, is having listened to that, you would think then, why would you buy anything else or race anything else than the BMW? They do change the rules a little bit to try and make it fairer. Normally they have a weight restriction, which to try and slow the BMW down just that little bit, and certainly in Super Touring that's what was there. And it certainly made a big difference, because all of a sudden, from winning most of the races, they were back in the grid a little bit, and the front-wheel drive cars were up there all the time, so much so that eventually you've seen almost nothing but front-wheel drive cars in the Super Touring racing. And I'm pretty sure the people who write the rules, etc., will make sure that there's quite a mixture of cars out there. I know there's various manufacturers looking at coming into this championship, and they'll do a study first, I'm pretty sure, to find out exactly which of their cars will be the best one to use, and which one they can take and give a real fight and a real battle to these BMWs that are doing so well here at the moment.
Of course, there aren't too many family saloons that actually boast rear-wheel drive nowadays. Front-wheel drive for the average road driver is safer. For packaging the cars, it tends to be a little bit more advantageous for the manufacturers as well. And as a result, the front-wheel drive tends to be the predominant kind of car, and rear-wheel drive cars, with their better weight balance, better under braking, better under acceleration, tend to be penalised in terms of having to carry a little bit more weight to try and even out the balance. And that's certainly something that the new super production rules will have to have a facility for, which is penalising cars who outperform their rivals, or which outperform their rivals, because no manufacturer is going to stay in a championship where their product is consistently getting thrashed by somebody else's. We've seen that time and time again with manufacturers coming into Super Touring and leaving after 2 or 3 years with no success, purely because they couldn't find a car that was in a dominant form. And that is something that desperately needs to be addressed. When you want lots of manufacturers, you have to try and make it as even as possible so that they all get at least a chance of showing strongly, because there is no mileage at all in a manufacturer allowing their products to be seen as inferior to somebody else's. And that is always the thorny problem in championships like the Winston Cup, the NASCAR Racing Championship. They seem to have come up with a strategy for equating 3 and now 4 manufacturers, but when you get into things that are a little bit more closely related to road cars like super production, and you're looking at potentially 8 or 10 or maybe even a dozen manufacturers who might have a product that they would like to compete, then that's a rule maker's nightmare. And it's all very well for us to sit here and say, well, you've got to do it and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do it, but of course the one thing that you want to do is make a set of regulations, David, that last the whole year. Tommy Brustad's little hand gesture there tells me one thing. What does it tell you?
I'm not sure what he's trying to do with that one there. He's talking to himself, but I would have thought he'd been better concentrating what he was doing than talking to himself.
It almost looked like he knew the camera was on him. He was going, look, come on, faster, faster. I think that was a little gesture there to himself. Come on, up the hill, get on with it.
Yes, Tommy, having driven in the Super Touring last year, has a little bit more power than what he has at this moment in time. And I'm sure coming up that hill, as you said earlier, that hill's quite steep. You can see it coming up there. So these cars, compared to what he was driving previously, will feel somewhat slower coming up that steep hill. So yes, maybe that gesture was, come on, we want a little bit more power out of this engine, please, and let us get up this hill.
Probably thinks the turbo's not up to power yet.
Yeah.
Come on, spin up.
He's managed to get rid of the rear bumpers, so that at least will make the car a little bit lighter when he gets to around. But these bumpers nowadays are plastic, and the bumpers, you do one of 2 things with them. Either you bolt them on so they're fixed very, very hard indeed and don't go anywhere, or you bolt them on quite lightly so that if someone does touch them, that there is a good chance of them falling off. The last thing you want is for that bumper to be hanging around on the back of your car, because then the officials will deem that it's dangerous and they'll bring you in to have the bumper taken off. So the designers nowadays with these cars, when they want to go racing in super production or even in super touring, they do, as I said, one of the 2 things: either bolt them on very lightly, as the Nissan one was, so that should it be hit from behind as he was, then it will simply fall off and disappear and he can carry on racing. Or you bolt them on like the Audis usually do, and they never move anywhere. It doesn't matter how hard you hit someone.
Fill them with concrete. Just a rumour, I must stress, for legal reasons. So Peter Cox comfortably leading then into the closing stages of this race, and the Alphas still hard at it. Somebody going slowly there. Let's see if we can identify who it is. Pam just to the left, a couple of feet. No, it's not working, is it? The cameraman can't hear me quite clearly. It's the Honda. So that's our Lithuanian driver, Egidijus Daksas, in the Integra R. Our first and probably last shot of him. Looks pretty much unsponsored, and I would imagine fairly undeveloped as well. I don't know an awful lot about his background, I have to say, but not a name I've come across before. Between Villamil and Massini, well, half a second at the line, just under, not really much to go on. And Massini will probably save it all for a last gasp effort. Try and wrest that position away from the Spaniard. This, of course, is the battle for 5th and 6th. Closing stages of the super production race at Brno, the battle for 5th and 6th with 2 to go. Tobias Massini in the second of the red Alphas, and ahead of him is the Spaniard Luis Villamil. Both of them ex-single-seater men. Massini running last year in the British National Saloon Cup. And this is the Edenbridge car of James Hansen. Tom Ferrier qualified best of the pair. He was in 6th spot on the grid, Hansen down in 12th, but Ferrier got caught up in that first lap kerfuffle, and Hansen didn't. So he is currently lying in 7th place, and that will be his best result so far. The 2 cars run by Peter Briggs, the Edenbridge team, which has had, I think you'd struggle on the fingers of both hands to name the number of championships that they have entered over the years, and this is another different departure for them, Super Pros.
Yes, they've been in quite a few things over the years. They were in Formula 3 for quite a long time, did extremely well there, and moved all the way up to Formula 3000, and racing Formula 3000 for a few years. Peter's always one of these people that's got his fingers in many pies, because he also has a couple of car dealerships as well. So he's someone who keeps himself extremely busy. He does love his motorsport. He's been in motorsport for many, many years as a manager of some description or another, and he's this year decided to have a go at this, the European Super Production Championship. He's bought these BMWs, and as we said at the first race, they were lacking a little bit. They didn't have the very latest modifications. Obviously, we can see the way that was happening before, that Tom Ferrier was going, because he qualified very well, that they've obviously got some of those nowadays, and they were right up there. A bit unfortunate to be caught in that first lap melee. He didn't look as though he was part of it, or should have been there, but all of a sudden at the last minute he was punted off to the side. So that team, I'm sure, are very pleased with their 7th position with James at the moment, although I'm sure they know they would have been a lot higher had the other car of Tom Ferrier still been on there.
Yeah, definitely. Tom Ferrier, the teenager who raced last year for Gary Ailes' team of Alfa Romeos in the British National Saloon Cup, and I thought did a very good job when the cars allowed. They had occasional mechanical problems with the brand new Alphas, and I should think he'll be very happy indeed to be in the slightly more proven BMW, and as you say, run by Edenbridge. I don't think it'll be long before they're right up the sharp end of the grid as well, and Ferrier, I think, has got plenty of saloon car racing talent. Well, so too has this man, Peter Cox. He's run away from the field in qualifying and done it again in the race, leading quite comfortably in 2nd place, and no threat is Duncan Heisman, who started in 7th spot on the grid. Started very strongly, came through the first lap incident unscathed to chase Norman Seaman for 2nd place, and Seaman in the number 2 car eventually, after a long dice of 3 or 4 laps of the two of them racing wheel to wheel and swapping places, had to give best. Heisman got in front conclusively just before mid-distance and has spent the last 6 laps chasing Peter Cox, essentially to no avail. He's eased a little bit closer in the closing stages, but you rather feel that Cox has got enough in hand to drive away if he wants to. He won't bother now. There is Cox, Heisman in 2nd place, Seaman in 3rd, so for Roberto Ravalia's young team, BMW Team Germany, it is going to be another victory. 2 race wins from 2 starts, not bad for a fledgling team.
Yeah, this team was put together, they knew what they wanted, they had the engineers they sourced for the team, and they got Peter, and Peter, of course, doing very well and led the Super Touring Championship last year for quite a while, and it was not until the last race that he actually lost it. So he was right up there trying very hard to be the winner, but this year he's moved on from that Super Touring Championship into the new Super Production Championship, and he's had a fantastic start to the season, and this will now be 2 wins out of 2 starts.
Superb start, as you say, and for those of you who are wondering why on earth did he not stay with Super Production as the championship runner-up last year, why has he stepped down, you might even venture, into Super Production? Well, I don't see it that way, and I don't think Cox does. I think what he's done is actually taken a step into the future, because this is the future, and Super Touring is definitely a thing of the past. Tommy Rustad, 4th place, good finish for... I told you it'd be a last corner job by Massini. Good job by Massini to take 5th place in the final corner from Lewis Villamil. Good job also by Tommy Rustad, I think, for 4th place in the Nissan. 7th place is James Hansen. There he comes across the line, you saw there, flashing the headlights. And 10th place back there was his teammate, the Edenbridge youngster, Tom Ferrier, after that first corner crash, recovering to hold on to 10th. So Peter Cox, 2 wins, 2 starts, championship lead, 2 pole positions. Are we in danger of seeing a little bit of a steamroller, David?
I think at this moment in time, he's the one person that's switched on. I know he was out very early on testing those cars at Vallelunga in Italy, and he was very, very pleased with it then. And he believed that, you know, this is the future, this is the way that saloon car racing is going in Europe. And he's in there at the very beginning to try and make the best of it, and he's made the best of it for sure. So I would think the others will catch him eventually. I'm pretty sure when they get to some of the circuits they know, then the other drivers will be a little bit closer to him. But this is obviously their first visit to this circuit, so he was able to use his experience and the extra knowledge of the car that he had to be able to always be at the top of the timesheets throughout the weekend.
Yeah, he's certainly been very impressive indeed, hit the ground running and has shown the others a clean pair of heels. Norman Seaman, his teammate, I think will be a very strong ally in the closing stages of the race of the championship and may well take race wins. Duncan Heisman also, I rate Duncan Heisman just probably as much as his brother Patrick, the 5 times Porsche Super Cup champion. Second place here will be a very good boost for their team, particularly having seen Pegan Anderson on the second row of the grid and then knocked out. As for the CBME team, well, Morbidelli, Gabellini and Ruberti will have to go away and lick their wounds. They should all be in the top half dozen on performance, and by rights the team should have the cars in there. And in qualifying, Morbidelli and Gabellini were there. Paolo Ruberti had to start at the end. He retired with brake problems, and the other two caught each other up in the first crash. James Hansen then in 7th, and 9th place at the end for Tom Ferrier. Good result for the 2 Edenbridge drivers as well. So Peter Cox on his way back. Peter Cox and Roberto Ravaglia, those of you with long memories will remember that I have trouble discerning the two of them apart in my mind. I know exactly who Peter Cox is, I just happen to occasionally use Roberto's name to refer to him. And that was the case when they were racing as racing drivers together. Now, of course, Ravaglia is the team boss, and so he's in charge of Peter Cox's car. And unfortunately, the problem hasn't gone away for me. I will try and remember to call Roberto Ravaglia and Peter Cox during the course of the season. Shouldn't be too hard, because at least Cox will be in the car all the time.
We can see just there as they show us the slow motion pictures of the race again, that on the right hand side of Peter Cox's car there was an actual fact a wheel mark, so that run down into the first corner was obviously extremely tight, and there was even obviously a touching somewhere along the line at the entrance. So maybe that it will happen that there will be an incident on the first corner, and Peter Cox may not have this championship all his own way as he has done so far.
I certainly don't think that he will have thought this is all sewn up, but this is the way that he wants the season to continue, no question about it. Simon Walster down there with our microphone. Let's see if we can catch up with Peter Cox, hear how he thought the race went.
Peter, congratulations, that's 2 wins out of 2.
Yeah.
It looked like another perfect race. Did you have any problems?
No, it was not a perfect race because I didn't do a good start, and Gabellini started better. I saw that my side of the track was dry, but he had a better start, and I kept the outside lane into to the first corner, so I was in front. And then it was a little bit the same as in Monza. They were fighting, but I have to say this time was a bit harder to drive the BMW, although it's maybe strange to say that you have to drive hard with the BMW, but obviously we looked at the weather and we made a setup in between, so it could go both ways, and I think we overdid it a little bit. But in the end it is okay, you know. Heisman, I think, had maybe the quicker race car than me, so after the start I just tried to control and had a fantastic race for Ravaglia Motorsport.
Well done, Peter, thank you.
Everybody's mobiles going off in the background. You're on Eurosport, give us a wave. Here's our second place finisher, Duncan Heisman.
Well done. Duncan, well done, second place. It looked as though you were having a good battle in the early part of the race with Norman. Then when you passed him, Peter was just too far away to try and catch up.
Well, yeah, Peter took the advantage in the first 2 laps, and I was stuck behind Norman. Norman was very quick on the straights, but in some important corners, the quick corners, my car was much better. I think the Carly Motorsport team did a great job. We had some problems yesterday. I did the wrong gamble in the practice, and this morning the gearbox broke. So I think the guys did a great job, and the handling of the car was superb.
Thank you, Duncan. Well done.
Thank you.
So pretty much backing up what Peter Cox suggested, that Carly Motorsport had gone more for a dry setup, whereas the Ravaglia team having that little bit of hedging of their bets. And having heard now from Heisman, let's We've seen Norman Seaman there, and they keep moving him around from the camera. Let's try and talk to him now.
Norman, well done, third place, and also the leading under-25 driver.
Yes, I think it was a good race today. I mean, I was a bit lucky, or we all were a bit lucky at the beginning when the Gabellini had a spin or had a contact, and I had to brake. I got hit from behind, but I was lucky to get the momentum going, and at the end I had a nice fight with Duncan. I just had some problem with the front wheel, a lot of vibrations, and I didn't want to ruin it, so I better let him go because he was quicker, and better to save the points. You know, the championship is long. It was my second touring car race. I haven't been a lot around at the Brno circuit, so I'm actually pretty happy, and I think the team today did a good job, first and third. In qualifying, we're first and second, I think, for the second race. It's not too bad.
And you're looking forward to Magny-Cours?
Yes, for sure. I mean, Magny-Cours is a circuit I know again, because this I didn't know, and in free practice I only could do 3 laps and then straight to qualifying. So I was still happy to be that good here, and Magny-Cours I know, and I think it's going to be pretty good there, and I think we have again a tough fight, and hopefully a little bit closer, and some people who take a bit care at the start, because you're not going to win a race in the first corner.
Thank you, Norman, well done.
And a very sensible attitude, I think, David. He realised that he was having a tough job holding off Duncan Eisman and let him go.
He was right in that you're not going to win the race in the first corner, but there's 4 people out there who managed to lose the race in about the 3rd or 4th corner.
Absolutely right. Among them, unfortunately, Stefano Gabellini, who went like a rocket sledge into the first corner, only to come out backwards. Peter Cox on the left, Roberto Ravaglia there in the centre of shot. See, I can tell the difference. And it's Cox and Ravaglia, who are 2-time winners in Euro Super Production. And that pretty much brings us to the end of this second Eurosport Super Racing weekend. There's Tommy Rustads, the Swede, whose Nissan finished a strong 4th place. And they got safely through the incident that took out, as we said, 4 of the leading drivers, the BMW guys. And in the end, Tom Ferrier did manage to rejoin, finishing in 9th position. I'm sure he'll be happy with that. Happy to have survived that incident, and happy to be going to Magny-Cours, as we will be in our next Super Racing weekend. And that's not on Saturday and Sunday. That's bizarrely on Monday and Tuesday, because of the way national holidays are in France. The end of this month will be qualifying, and May the 1st will be the race weekend race day. So join myself and David Leslie for that. Until the next Eurosport Super Racing weekend, from me, Martin Haven, it's goodbye.
Eurosport Super Racing Weekend.